Hey guys, welcome to part 5 of What If Nalto Was Trained by Anko. If you enjoy the video, then like, share and subscribe, and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and also check out my other playlist, hope you would like them too. So let's get started. Chapter 13 of Family and Training. The sandam dozed fitfully behind his desk, his joints stiff and sore. It had been one of his favorite pastimes when he had first become Hokage, but now it was painful. Giving up on his nap, he opened his eyes, staring at his empty office and feeling the crushing weight more than ever. This was not his time. He was not supposed to be Hokage. Kami, it wasn't fair. He was tired and sore. He shook the feelings off quickly. What was pain to him now, but a constant companion? He was Hokage, and it was pointless to complain about things that couldn't be changed. The Yondem was dead. That was karma. Anko had risked Nalto's life. That was karma. Speaking of Nalto and Anko, according to Kakashi, they were supposed to be returning today. Looking at the clock on the wall, he raised an eyebrow, watching the minutes tick past. Sighing, he shook his head. They should have been here an hour ago. A moment later, Kakashi and the other two entered, and the sandam sighed. Of course the copycat ninja would be in the lead, and of course the entire group would be late. Nalto blinked, looking around, and Anko rolled her eyes. Kakashi-san, Nalto-kun. Anko-san, sandam said, then noticing Anko's wince, fixated on Nalto. Would you mind sitting down, Nalto-kun? We have something rather important to discuss. The blonde blinked uncertainly, then, glancing at Anko, moved to the chair in front of the sandam's desk, and sat down. Okay, you're Billy Goat, what you wanna talk about? The sandam blinked, then shook his head, allowing the casualness to slide to the moment. Far more important problems were going on at the moment. Nalto, sandam said, clearing his throat as he stared at the blonde ninja across from him. He paused for a moment, realizing that there really was no other word to describe him. Sandam had seen those eyes before, the set of that jaw. Everything screamed ninja. For the first time, he seriously began to consider the boy's potential as a possible successor. The Yondem would have been so proud. Hokage-sama. Kakashi asked, interrupting his stroll down memory lane. Oh yes, sorry. The sandam said, berating himself for going off into his memories. Shifting his attention back to the curious boy, he sighed, lacing his fingers together. Nalto, before anything else, I just want to say, I'm proud of you. You seem to be growing up. Just a few months ago, you'd have been pulling some wild prank or causing a ruckus, and now, well, instead of a troublemaker, I has a ninja standing in front me. Oh. Well, thanks, Nalto said, sounding pleased even as he scratched at his cheek absently. Now then, sandam said seriously, lowering his eyes to a folder on his desk. You remember that you underwent an exam not too long ago, correct? Yeah. Nalto growled. That bastard minus. Kiyoshi-san did exactly as his job required, sandam interrupted, seriously looking up at the blonde. It is the exam, however, that I wish to discuss. Nalto, has you ever noticed anything odd about yourself? Like how fast you heal? No. I heal like everyone else, right? Sandam exchanged a glance with Kakashi, then chuckled. Not quite. Actually, most people would love to heal the way you do. Wow, well, that's sorta neat. Nalto said, blinking. So, can I go train now? Cause I want Anko to show me some more wind jutsu minus. In a minute, sandam interrupted, then paused, considering how best to reveal this information. Maybe not all the details, as it would confuse the poor boy, and nothing about the Yondem for obvious reasons. Then he realized that he had the easiest way to explain things right before him. You know about bloodlines, correct? Ka-sensei mentioned them once, I think, Nalto said with a shrug. I kinda slept through that class. Well, okay, sandam said, drumming his fingers against his desk. Okay, within the world of ninja, there are certain abilities. These are called family abilities and advanced bloodlines. Family abilities are skills or jutsu that can be taught. Like how Anko's teaching me. Exactly, sandam said with a nod. Only, the family abilities aren't taught outside of a family and are very jealously guarded. Advanced bloodlines, on the other hand, they can't be taught at all. They have to be inherited and are unique to only certain families. You mean like how the Uchiha all has that weird eye thing? The Sharingan sandam said, smiling slightly. Yes. Now then. These advanced bloodlines are frowned upon by some people. Well, that's stupid minus. Yes, it is. Sandam nodded. So Konoha is seen as a refuge for advanced bloodlines since we openly embrace them. Even encourage them. But some, by the time they reach us, are already dying out and we can do nothing to stop this. Sometimes only a single child from these lost clans will has the ability and never know it. Most often these become villagers, and the bloodline disappears. Okay, Nalto said slowly. So, why are you telling me about all of that? Haven't you ever wondered, Nalto-kun, Kakashi suddenly said from his spot near the wall, why exactly you came through that incident in the hospital? Even as an enemy plant you should has died. Well, yeah. But. Nalto trailed off, frowning. In the exam you took among other tests, is one to locate advanced bloodline, Sandam continued seriously. We found one. Though there are no previous records of the ability. I have. An advanced bloodline. Yes, Sandam said, leaning back in his seat. It's called the Tenkeikia. It's a rather handy ability too. Provided you don't take an attack that kills you immediately, you'll live through pretty much anything. We think. Sandam explained, then paused, watching the boy closely. He could see the surprise and the fear washing over his face. Then the anger, and then a sort of calm that had him slightly worried. Nalto-kun, are you okay? Oi, I'm fine, Nalto said, looking at him in that carefree way of his. Can I go now? Yes. Sandam said, sitting forward. Nalto, one thing. Your ability. I would caution against talking about it with too many people. Maybe only the ones you trust most. Oi, I'm not Sasuke. Nalto said indignantly before jumping to his feet and bolting to the door. Later. The sandam stared after him for a moment, worried, then shook it off, looking at Anko. She looked slightly worried, but when she looked at him he saw the familiar defiant fire in her eyes. You shouldn't have let him go. Maybe, Sandam said blandly. Anko-san, tell me something. What made Nalto so important that you'd kidnap him out of the village for a mission? Ho. Well, I was just wondering, Sandam said with a shrug. After all, you never asked to permission. Never cleared it with Harate-san, who could has had a mission or team training planned. You merely took the boy out of the village on a mission he was not cleared for. But he did fine. Anko said heatedly. Better than fine. Yes, Sandam said tiredly. But that is not the point. You showed poor judgment and risked his life needlessly. That isn't the point either. I entrusted you with that mission, and you to act so rashly. But minus. Anko-san, please. I am tired and it's been a long day. I would appreciate it if you left. He saw the various emotions on her face, and then watched as she stood, turned and walked out of the office. Turning to Kakashi, he lowered his voice to a whisper. Fetch Kiyoshi-san. Yes, Kakashi said seriously. I do think you were a bit harsh. I mean, your original goal was to get Anko and Nalto to heal each other, and on the way back she was almost normal. I'd even say a sister to him. Yes, Sandam said, feeling a chill race along his spine. I am aware of that, and by first denying her access, and then questioning her judgment toward him, I am making her aware of how important he is to her. Which will pull them closer together. Kakashi said simply. Yes. Now. Kiyoshi-san, please. Nodding, Kakashi hurried out of the room, allowing the sandam to relax and massage his chest. He was no doctor, but he could feel the sands in the hourglass falling more rapidly than ever. One of the first things Shino's father had taught him was that the Abeim were not the masters of the bugs that lived inside them. It was a partnership, almost a marriage, and that to abuse one's Kaikeichi family was the same as abusing one's wife or child. To complicate matters, there was the emotional and mental connection between host and bugs, which could affect the relationship. This was the reason behind the curious and slightly worrisome near-constant placid state all Abeim maintained. Keeping all of this in mind, Shino had set out a week ago re-established the trust and balance in his relationship with his Kaikeichi family. It had been a strained and tedious affair, but finally they were working as one once more, though they were still a tad skittish. Still, as he concentrated and sent his desire to form a wall, they responded quickly. Finally able to perform the Mushikape no Tutsu without falling apart, Shino allowed them a moment to rest. Sitting under a tree once more, he quietly considered everything that had happened since gaining Nalto as a teammate. Some of it was hard to fathom, some of it easy, and he was still no closer to answering his original concern about the effect of Nalto's chakra on his family. None of them could even suggest an explanation, and his father, when they had briefly spoken, had been unhelpful. Shaking it off, Shino climbed to his feet one last time, silently checking with his family that they were ready for this final exercise for the day. Receiving confirmation, he nodded and sent his desire to them. The bugs hesitated and then finally began to move, albeit slowly, into a vaguely humanoid shape. Satisfied with that, Shino cast the wordless hand to create his own likeness over the bugs. This stage of the mushy bunshine no jutsu cleared, he took a moment to catch his breath and then nodded slightly. Let's begin. The mushy clone nodded in response and charged toward him with a basic round kick, which caught Shino by surprise. The stoic ninja merely went with the blow as he had learned, performing a side roll before regaining his feet with just enough time to catch the incoming punch from the mushy clone. This was followed by a hooking leg sweep, which took out the clone's feet and sent it crashing into the earth. A minute later, the clone became once more his Kaikeichi family, all of whom were quite pleased with the brief match. Shino himself shared their sentiment, congratulating them as they all made their way back to their home in his body. While not instantaneous like his father's, it was effective and it would improve over time. Looking around, he took a breath, then exhaled, wondering what he should do now that they had re-established trust between them. He could practice even more, but he felt that would be overtaxing for both them and himself, which meant he should go back to the Abaim home and read through the family scrolls. It would be best to know and understand as much as he could, even if the library had been severely damaged during the QB's attack. Nodding with hands in his pockets, he started back toward his house. For some reason the village looked different to him, almost unreal. Nalto wasn't sure why or how, all he knew was that it was different. The vendors were all around talking loudly, a few shooting him dark glares, others ignoring him. Yet, it was all so different and strange. He had a bloodline. Ho! He could slit that man's throat without breaking a sweat. What had his father been like? His mother. He could rob that shopkeeper and never be caught. Did he have brothers? Where was his family? Dead. Had they just abandoned him? He had a bloodline. His thoughts were disrupted when he ran into something solid, which sent him tumbling on his ass. Looking up with a glare, ready to shout at whatever had done that to him, he found himself staring up at Oka. The scarred Chunin blinked and looked down, surprise on his face. Nalto. Oka-sensei. Nalto managed, realizing just how long it had actually been since he had seen the older man. Wow, Oka said, holding a hand out to help him up. It's been a while. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, ho. Yeah, Nalto said noncommittally, then remembered to smile brightly. I'm getting really strong and awesome. I'll be Hokage soon, no doubt. Oka raised an eyebrow and then smiled back, reaching out to muss his hair fondly. I bet you will be. For some reason Nalto felt the smile on his face become more natural, despite the fact that he used to hate having that done. Then he blinked, realizing what time it was. Oi, aren't you supposed to be teaching class? Well, actually, Oka said, scratching the side of his nose, I'm just waiting for my latest teaching assistant to get the kids together. We're having class outside today. Ah, Nalto said, crossing his arms as he nodded. He had turned and taken 2 steps, when Oka grabbed the back of his jacket and held him in place. Oi, let me go. Hold on, Oka said, a smirk on his face. You know, I was just thinking about who to ask to speak to the class today. Ho. Nalto managed, twisting around to stare at the man in befuddlement. What the hell are you talking about? I know you slept and skipped class a lot, Oka said reproachfully, but you do remember when we had the Hokage come by to talk to you, right? All that time we got Hano-san. Ho. Nalto blinked, his memory hazy on the exact details. Oi, didn't they talk to us about being ninja or something? Exactly, Oka said, releasing his jacket. This time, I was thinking about getting someone closer to the age of the students. A recently graduated genin. Nalto blinked, then felt a chill race up his spine as suspicion crept into his mind. Oka couldn't want him. But why? No, Nalto was just imagining it. Besides, what could he say to a bunch of? Not that Oka was actually meaning that he wanted him to. Oh, Kami, this was not a good idea. So, what do you think? Oka said, his smirk now a grin. What the hell would I say? Oka shrugged, but his grin never faded. Just talk to them, explain what it's like being a ninja. Nalto frowned, kicking at the ground absently. This was the last thing he needed or wanted to do. Maybe if he hadn't just found out about his bloodline. It was all too complicated, too confusing and hurtful. He would never admit it out loud, but this entire ordeal had reopened the raw wounds concerning his family. Still looking at Oka, he couldn't bring himself to say no. After all, Oka had been the first one to really acknowledge him as a ninja. He owed it to the older man. Okay, Nalto finally said. Oka patted his shoulder and nodded. Great, I really appreciate this. Come on, we don't want to be late. Both walked in silence for several minutes before Oka checked his watch. We need to hurry, come on. The man took off, and Nalto followed, lost in thoughts about his family and what exactly he was getting himself into. 20 minutes later, they were bounding from roof to roof before spying the rooftop of the academy. Nalto landed adroitly next to Oka, eyeing the class almost warily. Had it really been just a few months ago that he had been in the academy? It seemed like a lifetime ago, meeting Anko Kusa, meeting his new team and dealing with the Kumo Aiki, Unity and soon the Chunin exams. It just seemed impossible that all of that could have happened in just a little over 2 months. I promised you guys something special, Oka was saying to the interested-looking class. Well, not only are we having class outside today, but I've asked someone to speak with Y-. Hey! A voice suddenly shouted, followed by a familiar brown-haired runt jumping to his feet to point at Nalto. How dare you show your face here? Ho! Nalto blinked, looking away from the faces on the mountain to stare at the child. Oi, aren't you the ninja that is going to defeat you? The boy shouted and then darted forward, a kunai flashing from somewhere, his scarf fluttering behind him. Nalto naturally reacted the only way he could. He promptly brought his foot up and let the kid slam face first into it. Looking at the now dazed boy, he blinked and snapped his fingers in recognition. Oi, it's Konohamaru. Nalto. Oka shouted. What? Nalto asked defensively. He's the one that charged me with a weapon. He's lucky I didn't force-feed it to him. That's the Sandame's grandson. Oka shouted, looking horrified. I know, Nalto blinked, then looked back down at a recovering Konohamaru. Oi, didn't I tell you the next time you charged me I was going to kill you? Konohamaru blinked, then hopped to his feet. Aha, that was just a test, Nisan. As my rival, I had to make sure that you were not getting rusty. Nalto blinked. Konohamaru blinked. Go sit your ass down. I will. Konohamaru never finished his sentence since Nalto bashed him on top of his head, which knocked him on his ass. Oi! Are you deaf? Nalto. Oka shouted, but the blonde merely shrugged, while Konohamaru rubbed at his head. Breathing heavily, the scared Chunin turned back to the shocked class and continued firmly. I've asked Nalto to talk with you about being ninja. He's a recent graduate, and he's preparing for the Chunin exam. And I'm going to be the next Hokage. Nalto added firmly. What? Konohamaru shouted, jumping to his feet. You can't be the next Hokage. Why not? Because I'm going to be the next Hokage. Idiot. Who'd acknowledge a punk like you? Nalto asked, bashing him on the head again. Ow w. Konohamaru shouted, rubbing at his head. Well, becoming Hokage isn't that hard. Especially if you take shortcuts, a boy said, sounding smug. Oi, you're an even bigger idiot than Konohamaru, Nalto interrupted, glaring at the boy. Hokage is the name of the greatest ninja in the village. If you just think it's going to be easy, then you'll never be Hokage. There are no shortcuts. There's always shortcut minus. No, there isn't, Nalto said, clenching his fist. Whoever thinks like that should give up on being a ninja right now. Why? A girl asked anxiously, glancing at the boy who had just been talking. Because, even if being Hokage isn't your dream, being a ninja requires dedication and hard work, Nalto said, his memory flashing to the countless times Anko had broken his arm. You'll get hurt, and you'll bleed. But you have to keep going. You'll have to do things that you don't want to, hard things, and if you take a shortcut, then you'll never get anywhere. Nalto-san, the shy girl said, Raising her hand yet again and then seeing she had his attention, continued with her question. What's the hardest thing you've ever had to do? Nalto paused, then looked all of them over before looking at the roof between his feet. The hardest thing he ever had to do. A flash of a ninja, barely older than himself, dying in a spray of blood filled his mind. I killed someone. At the collective murmurs he looked up, raising his voice slightly. It's part of being a ninja. Was it hard? Another boy asked, curiosity in his voice. They say. The first time is the hardest, but it's not, Nalto said slowly, thinking about his experiences. The first time is easy, it's over before you realize it, since you're not really thinking about it. The hard one is the second time. You think about what you're doing, you know that you're about to do it, and you do it anyway. Nalto-san, another boy asked, looking at the blonde. Doesn't it bother you? Nalto blinked, then frowned slightly. No, it's part of being a ninja. I don't believe you. Talk to me, Nalto said, bristling slightly in anger after you've killed someone. It's very simple, either you accept that you'll have to kill, or you get killed. But I don't wanna. A girl said, eyes wide. Why should we have to kill each other? Because, Nalto said in annoyance, crossing his arms, if you don't then who will? There were a lot of things INO would never understand, for example, why the sky was blue, why clouds looked like marshmallows, why her mother sighed disappointedly every time she talked about a mission instead of cooking, Shino's obsession with bugs, or Nalto's fascination with orange and noodles. Mostly though, INO couldn't understand how she got herself into hopeless situations. As an example, there was the current situation of her kenbutsu training. Oh, sure, at first, after Hayate's rather hardcore speech, it hadn't been so bad. For the first 2 days, INO had found it fun and exciting. She worked on channeling chakra, through her practice sword, the 9 basic attacks, drawing and sheathing the sword quickly, basic footwork and even target practice. All of that had been fine, perfectly understandable. Even the chakra building and stamina exercises had been no problem. On the 3rd day they had stepped up the training, putting all of what she had learned together in dozens of sparring matches. By the 4th day, she was exhausted every waking moment and hungry almost all the time. Her hands stung, her legs and arms were sore, and, worst of all, she had yet to see a bath. It was only through sheer determination that she had made it through that day and the next. On the 6th day, she had been introduced to the basics again, but this time blindfolded. She still had bruises from the rocks she was supposed to be blocking. Now on the 7th day, she was once more sparring Hayate, thankfully, without a blindfold. Or more correctly, INO was trying to hide from the insane man nursing her injured left shoulder. Apparently Hayate did not believe in light taps. Or at least, not what a sane person would consider a light tap. So, INO dearly wanted to know what in the hell had ever possessed her to put herself in this damn situation. Glancing at the sun, while putting a hand on her shoulder, INO let out a relieved breath. Just a few more hours and this part of her training would be over. Chakra building and stamina training were cakewalks when compared to this torture. That was when she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. It was more instinct than training that she managed a forward roll, hurting her shoulder even more, before regaining her feet while spinning around to see Hayate rebounding from the tree she had just been sitting against. This time it was her training that allowed her to deflect his spinning slash and the next 2 chopping motions of his sword. Pushing away, INO grasped her sword with both hands, eyes never leaving the sick-looking man across from her. Moving slowly, almost cat-like, she began to circle him and was disappointed to find that he was mirroring her perfectly. It became a game of waiting, of who would be impatient or confident enough to attack first and possibly end the fight. Hayate moved first, darting forward almost faster than INO could follow, his sword slashing downward at an angle. INO managed to bring her sword up and around in a block, forcing the practice swords to swirl around until her sword spun free and she brought it back around in a heavy slash. Hayate, however, caught her sword with his own and held it in check, an impassive look on his face. Disengaging, INO quickly took 2 steps back, dropping her sword to knock Hayate's follow -up slash aside. Twirling her practice sword, finally feeling confident enough to do so, the kunoichi settled into a ready-to-attack position, weapon held straight up in a double-handed grip, and recentered herself. INO frowned, studying the man for any openings, only to find none. Damn it, INO whispered, and then rushed forward. Hayate met her halfway through her rush, their practice swords clashing in whirling slashes, stabs and lunges. The two of them moved in a sort of dance with INO attempting to mirror the way that Harate used his sword. Seeing a sudden opening, INO lunged and then, when that was blocked, she spun with the momentum and came around in a low slash at Hosensei's ankles, only to find nothing but air. The man attacked from behind and INO spun just in time to block 4 rapid-fire attacks, grunting as the two blades crossed and each exerted their strength against the others. Better, Harate said simply, looking tired as ever. INO merely grunted, then, pushing away, skipped backwards, blocking the 3 blows that followed her retreat. Panting, she shifted her grip on the sword, hands almost raw from the rough surface and the vibrations each blow caused. Glaring at Hosensei, INO was annoyed to find him smiling at her. Before she could even think about attacking, he beat her to the punch. INO brought up the practice sword just in time to parry Hayate's first slash, then his sudden thrust at INO's left thigh. Backing away, INO cursed under her breath, unable to believe his speed. After several more minutes, INO decided that all things being equal, it was time to go on the offensive once more. Yelling, INO feinted and lunged in with a quick 1-2, which sadly Harate parried effortlessly. "You're dropping your right shoulder a bit," Harate commented, his practice sword blocking a series of slashes aimed at his face and chest. Infuriated, she stepped up her attacks, feinting toward his chest, and then, as he moved to block that, changed her attack so that she was slashing at his neck. There was a loud crack as her blade stopped with a jarring force against his own. Glancing at her blade, Harate looked back at her, raising an eyebrow as if mildly impressed. Spinning suddenly, INO made another lunge at his chest, yelling furiously. For one brief instant, INO thought she would actually hit him, but then he pivoted on the ball of his foot and spun around so that he was behind her. You're overextending yourself," Harate said coarsely, and then without further ado pushed her from behind, sending her face first into the dirt. INO lay there for a moment, almost willing herself to pass out, and then sighing climbed to her feet, turning to face him with her sword held tightly. "What the hell is wrong with me?" "Nothing. I've been training for a week. That's 70 hours of nothing but kenbutsu," INO snapped, glaring at him. "I should be better than this." INO, you are better than you realize. In a little under a week, you've mastered the 9 basic cuts and learned the first form of the basic fire country kenbutsu style, Harate explained patiently. You are actually very talented at kenbutsu. I'd almost say a genius. I should still be better, INO fumed, turning her glare to the forest. She wasn't sure where that sentiment came from, but it was inside her, almost shouting it, and INO knew it to be true. We has 1 week left, Harate said, crouching down next to her. Everything I've taught you so far is the typical fire country style. Flips, footwork, and complicated sword patterns. As of now, I will teach you Tsukiodori. Tsukiodori. INO repeated, turning to stare at her sensei. Yes, I created it because of my health. All it requires is control, precision, and timing. There is no wasted movement, no wasted energy, no complicated footwork, Harate said with a slight nod. It grants almost total protection and allows you to attack at the most opportune moment. Nobody else has even been able to master a single dance, but I think you can. You do. INO blinked, then frowned slightly. A dance. Like, what good are dances? Ninjutsu involving the sword, Harate said, standing up once more. Hidden techniques that nobody else knows. There's only 10 of them. And you think I can learn them? Yes, if you want to truly learn Tsukiodori, Harate said with a nod. So, what do these dances look like? In response, Harate turned, then in one fluid motion lifted his sword, twisted it around, and dropped to one knee, driving the tip of the sword into the ground. Dance of the Crashing Dragon. INO felt the earth rumble under her slightly, then watched in amazement as the ground between Harate and the post exploded. Shielding her face, INO watched as best she could as the man stood upright once more and pulled his sword free from the earth. It was amazing, it was mind-blowing, it was beyond anything INO had ever seen. She had to learn how to do that. When the dust finally settled, Harate turned to stare at her, his face serious. That dance is considered C rank, and is a good distraction or interruption technique. You start by gathering your chakra into the blade of your sword, and then you drive it into the ground and release. Seems easy enough, INO couldn't help but remark before seeing the way he stared at her. How it seems and how it is are 2 different things, Harate said before coughing into his hand for several minutes. When he finally stopped, he looked up at her, his face almost a grimace. Harate-sensei, are you minus INO started ask moving toward him, only to stop short when he interrupted her. I'm fine, the man said, coughing once more into his cupped hand. I've been sick for a long time, INO, this is nothing. Let's begin. INO nodded reluctantly, being the man once more, and set to work. Still, she had a leaden feeling in her stomach that something was wrong with the whole situation. Though nobody thought about it, Mitarashi Anko was an orphan. Even she rarely, if ever, thought about that fact since she was very much a now person. The fact remained that Anko had grown up without a family for a good portion of her life, until Orochimaru had taken her under his guidance. That was why she was traveling from roof to roof searching from the Hokage mountain to that ramen stand he loved so much and hunted through the training fields. No orphan could be told anything about his or her family and not react, though the reaction itself would vary. For Anko, after learning why her family had abandoned her, she had devoted herself completely to Orochimaru. Nalto would react differently, but still she had to find and help him. Despite what the Hokage thought, he was more important to her than anything had been in a long time. So she was not about to let him freak out and try to handle this on his own. Entering training area 25, she paused at the rapid-fire sound of impact against nearly petrified wooden training posts. Unsurprised that he would be pouring himself into that, she leaned against a tree, arms crossed, watching him as he muttered under his breath and tore into the post all he was worth. He was moving with a great deal more grace than he had so long ago, and Anko was almost startled at the changes she was noticing. When he finally came to a stop, he was panting and she grinned slightly. So, feel better now? Nalto turned eyes wide, and then he frowned. Go away. Why? Anko asked, arching an eyebrow. I like watching exercises in futility. Anko, Nalto said warningly. That's my name, Anko said with a shrug. So do you feel better now or what? It's none of your business, Nalto snapped. Hey, see, this is the thing. I think you're wrapped up in your own little tragic play, like you're the only one that's got a reason to be prissy or angry. Nalto glared at her silently and then looked away, fists clenching and unclenching. I just figured that it wouldn't hurt so much if you were alone. That you wouldn't have to think about it if you trained until you passed out. Anko finished to him, crossing her own arms. That will never happen. But it hurts, Nalto said in a low voice, turning to look at her. Didn't they love me? Or want me? Maybe they didn't die, maybe they just abandoned me. If they did died, why or how could they just leave me? I pretend it doesn't hurt. But it's like. Give me your arm, Anko said abruptly, pulling a kunai from inside her jacket. Seeing his hesitation, she fixed him with a glare. Come on, just give me the damn arm. Hesitating slightly, because Anko plus kunai plus his arm nothing good, he offered it up, and then watched curiously as she grabbed his hand while shutting the sleeve up to expose his forearm. He opened his mouth to say something when she looked up at him in a way that made him pause in fascination. What I'm going to do will hurt like a motherfucker, Anko explained. You'll want to yank your arm away, and you will probably cry. But this helped me not too long ago. So, just sit still, suck it up, and let's see how much of a Hokage you really are. Nalto blinked, then, with a nod, looked at his arm. He tensed when the cold tip touched his flesh, then winced as it slowly pierced his skin. He had to bite his lip, tried hard not to cry and to keep from looking away as the kunai slowly cut line after line into his arm. Anko was intent, and she moved with a careful precision that was both frightening and reassuring. It seemed to go on for hours, him trying hard not to cry and failing, her slicing his arm and not caring. Then, finally, she was finished. The metal was removed and he pulled his arm in to cradle it against his jacket, ignoring the blood that was leaking all over him. Here, Anko said, and he looked up to see her offering a rag of some type. Grasping it, he pressed it against his arm, and then looked up at her once more, watching as she produced a bottle of sake and watched him. You know, I screamed my head off when I did that. Might have been because I was doing it myself and had to keep stopping because of the pain. Nalto only stared and then, in a sort of horrible fascination, looked at his arm and the rag covering it. He had watched, sure, but the pain had made him unable to figure out what she was carving into his flesh. Hesitantly, he moved the rag, smearing the blood, and studied what she had carved into his flesh. It took him a moment to fully register the familiarly minor stylized konoha leaf symbol, and another to wonder, at how it seemed to be healing already. Looking up, he saw her shaking back one of her sleeves to reveal an arm sporting her own konoha leaf. It makes no sense, does it? Why did I carve that into your arm? My arm, Anko said, fixing him with her stare while setting her sake down in front of him. It's a symbol, like our forehead protectors. It reminds us of everything we've lost, everything we has and our dreams. For us, this village is pretty much all we has. Never forget, or let the bastards win. Never give up, Nalto said firmly. I'm going to be Hokage. I will never stop. I know, Anko said, smirking. Now then. I think it's high time you got drunk. Ho. Nalto blinked. But I'm underage. That only matters if you're a villager, Anko countered, her smirk becoming sadistically evil. You're a ninja. But sake doesn't taste good, Nalto countered. Then do this, Anko said, picking the bottle up before she pinched her nose and tossed her head back, chugging for a moment before handing it to him. Nalto blinked, sniffed the bottle and then seeing her attention on him, he pinched his nose and tossed his head back, chugging as she had. He was surprised that it was going so fast that he couldn't even taste it, but he could definitely feel the warmth already. Finishing the bottle, he stared at her, his grin slightly lopsided. Anko chuckled and produced another bottle. Oi, where do you keep those? Oh, Anko said, uncorking it, a coy smile on her face. We girls has all sorts of hiding places. Nalto had the grace to blush, for once getting exactly what she meant. Yui Kurenai was fighting her nerves. After all, this would be her first team to enter the Chunin exams. True, they still had a week left, but she was still nervous. Her team was not exactly happy with her new training regimen either. Kiba had been skipping a lot, and Sakura trained only because Sasuke deemed it worthwhile to show up. Sasuke was the only one that was willing to train, but then again he was an Uchiha and they were predisposed toward combat. Shaking it all off, Kurenai at least took comfort in the fact that she had managed to pry Nalto from Anko's sadistic and corrupting clutches. Harate was a good man, upstanding and well-grounded, a very good ninja. Nalto would now at least has a chance at a normal minus no genin was normal really minus childhood. Still, it was the least she could do for her village and for an innocent child. Then, all of her pride and righteous satisfaction was destroyed in one fell swoop as she entered the training area to find Anko passed out on the ground, with Nalto's head resting on her chest, amid countless empty sake bottles. Kiba was the first of her team to arrive to once and he paused beside her, his tone awed as he took in the scene. I has never wanted to be Nalto so badly. He paused as a Kamau barked, then nodded slightly in agreement with the white small dog perched on his head. Then again. All this. Kurenai managed weakly, unable to believe what she was seeing. Sakura and Sasuke were the next to arrive, both freezing in their tracks. He's underage. And her skirt is too short. Sakura railed in a surprisingly accurate depiction of a younger Kurenai's likely reaction. Sasuke, on the other hand, took in the entire scene, then snorted. They deserve each other. With that, Nalto promptly rolled over and buried his face into Anko's chest with a small snore, the empty sake bottle he had been holding falling to the ground. And below are a few notes, to clear things up. 1. Yes, Nalto now has a scar. Yes, I know that scars occur when your body can't produce cells in proper alignment to bridge a gap. I know I gave Nalto regeneration instead of advanced healing, which would mean he couldn't scar. However, since we all know the QB is in control of the healing process, and that Anko and Nalto tried to drink each other under the table feasible, since Nalto's system would probably burn the alcohol out quickly, minus it's safe to assume that after the 100th attempt on Anko's part to recarve the symbol on his arm the QB would just give in and be done with it. 2. The amount of blood loss he would suffer is up for debate, since he regenerates he can regenerate the blood cells, but the water would be something else. And since alcohol is diuretic he's going to has the mother of all hangovers in the morning since hangover symptoms are mostly from dehydration. Still, it is possible that Nalto could regenerate the blood he loses quickly enough. 3. Before you argue with me about the QB, making Nalto unable to get drunk. Bull. Making him immune to poison okay, that's a gimme. Keeping him from getting alcohol poisoning, sure. However, the QB is a very vindictive and vicious being, therefore, I can easily see the beast letting Nalto get drunk. It just takes more. Which is worth it, in the QB's humble opinion, because of the massive hangover that will follow. 4. Don't agree with me. Tough, my universe, my rules. Oh make, why? Cause of Sasuke's line. I would love to see this in a comic format. Yui Kurenai was fighting her nerves. After all, this would be her first team to enter the Chunin exams. True, they still had a week left, but she was still nervous. Her team was not exactly happy with her new training regimen either. Kiba had been skipping a lot, and Sakura trained only because Sasuke deemed it worthwhile to show up. Sasuke was the only one that was willing to train, but then again he was an Uchiha and they were predisposed towards combat. Shaking it all off, Kurenai at least took comfort in the fact that she had managed to pry Nalto from Anko's sadistic and corrupting clutches. Harate was a good man, upstanding and well-grounded, a very good ninja. Nalto would now at least has a chance at a normal minus well no genin was normal really minus childhood. Still, it was the least she could do for her village and for an innocent child. Then, all of her pride and righteous satisfaction was destroyed in one fell swoop as she entered the training area to find Anko passed out on the ground, with Nalto's head resting on her chest, amid countless bottles of sake. Kiba was the first of her team to arrive to once and he paused beside her, his tone awed as he took in the scene. I has never wanted to be Nalto so badly. He paused as a Kamau barked, then nodded slightly in agreement with the white small dog perched on his head. Then again. All this. Kurenai managed weakly, unable to believe what she was seeing. Sakura and Sasuke were the next to arrive, both freezing in their tracks. He's underage. And her skirt is too short. Sakura railed in a surprisingly accurate depiction of a younger Kurenai's likely reaction. Sasuke, on the other hand, took in the entire scene, and then snorted. Damn it, where's my big-chested whore? Kurenai turned to stare at the black-haired prodigy, as did a horrified Sakura and an amused Kiba. They were promptly interrupted by Anko, who sat up, shoved Nalto off her chest, and glared at him. Well, if you want to see what me and Nalto did last night. Kurenai rounded on the other woman immediately face pale. Anko. Has you no shame? It's not bad enough you corrupt your own students, you has to do that to mine. Sasuke can say no. Sakura added. Dude. You say no, and I will kick your ass. Kiba shouted, along with a bark of agreement from Akama. Nalto managed, sitting up, clutching at his head furiously. Then, looking around he stared at the four and snorted. Can you keep it down? Anko really wore me out last night. Or you didn't enjoy yourself. Anko pouted, slipping an arm around his shoulder. I didn't say that, Nalto defended with a grin. Sasuke, if you don't say yes to her offer, no one's gonna find the body. Kiba nearly shouted in hysterics. As if I would dirty myself with a woman like her, Sasuke managed disdainfully. Ooh, wrong thing to say, Sasuke-kun, Nalto mockingly said, with an unpleasant smirk. Now I'm definitely demonstrating. Anko shouted, jumping to her feet, a kunai in her hand. Anko. You cannot assault my students just because one of them insults you. Kurenai shouted, moving between her students and the older woman. Okay, you're my demonstration partner. Anko said, eyes glinting. Score. Kiba shouted as obviously Eki thoughts raced through his head, causing his nose to spurt blood and his prompt loss of consciousness. What the hell is wrong with you people? Sakura shouted, hoping that nobody noticed her blush or could hear her inner Sakura cheering as she echoed Kiba's score. And Eki thoughts. Chapter 14. Team building Anko style. Slipping into the semi-dark building of Leaf Central, Anko grimaced at the knowledge of what such an early morning summons could mean. Walking past the empty desks and rooms, she made her way to the stairs that would eventually take her to the Hokage's office. Footsteps echoing eerily as she climbed, Anko almost felt as if she was entering Orochimaru's lair once more. She shivered at the memory. In all honesty, this was the last place she wanted to be, mainly because she could still see the disappointment that had been clearly etched in the sandame's face upon her return from Fushimi. He hadn't shouted or ranted, though she could have handled. Instead he had spoken in an almost whisper, firm but soft. He was polite, but he hid none of his disappointment. He had somehow managed to make her feel guilty about her decision in taking Nalto. It made her feel as if this was less about her judgment and more about her betraying his trust. Anko hated that despite how she should feel after his recent decisions, he felt guilty about betraying his trust. So she had thrown herself into training Nalto, pushing him to refine everything he had learned. Had worked him almost to the breaking point, in an effort to ensure that the Hokage would see it. See how guilty she felt, how much she wanted to do exactly what he wanted. How much Anko actually cared about Nalto. When she cared about nothing else. Shaking it all off, she quietly exited the stairway and then, unconsciously greeting the hidden Unbu, strode down the hallway to the door that was looming larger and larger. Pausing, she took a moment to gather herself and then threw the door open, entering with her usual gusto. "Hey, your old man, you wanted to see me." "Anko-san," the Hokage said, looking up from a scroll on his desk, his face neutral. "Good morning." "Morning," Anko returned, hiding her disappointment at his lack of usual warmth. Then she noticed Kakashi and Harate and blinked in surprise. "Oh, what are you two doing here?" "Nothing important," Kakashi said immediately, hastily shoving his recently recovered book into his pocket. Anko said, smirking slightly before looking at the sick-looking man seated before the Hokage's desk. She knew Harate, they had worked together for a while, but he had never been one of her favorite people. Still, she had some respect to him, so instead of making a wise crack about drugs, she arched an eyebrow, wondering silently at the pallor of his skin. Harate in turn offered her a weak smile before coughing into a red-stained rag, which set off an alarm bell in her head. "Anko-san," the sandame finally continued, his tone soft but firm. "The reason I asked you to come in is because Harate-san needs to take several days off from active duty. This would leave his team without a sensei, and this close to the exams I couldn't assign another person." Anko resisted the urge to glance yet again at the sick man in question, already knowing the obvious from the few clues she had. There was no other explanation, and it was all because he had slipped up and allowed a spider to bite him and worsen his condition. "I see," Anko said, just as seriously, crossing her arms and lowering her chin. "What about the second exam? I know you wanted me to proctor it." Kakashi-san said that he would do that, the sandame said, lacing his fingers together while giving her a piercing look. "I need you to take responsibility for Team Harate and Azumaki Nalto, at least for the duration of this exam." Anko let out a small breath. Whether this was a chance from the heavens or merely a coincidence, it didn't matter. The Hokage was offering her a chance to regain his trust, and it was a chance to help Nalto prove himself to everyone. So of course she would accept this, but she also understood one other thing. There could not be Team Harate and Nalto, there had to be one team. Just one. A single unit. "You won't have to do much, just make sure to enter them into the Chunin exam today at noon. After that, just make sure they show up in 2 days and be there for the completion of the second exam," the sandame was saying, his voice never changing. "I'll do it," Anko said evenly, trying to figure out a way to forge the 3 genin into a true team within 3 days. However, to do that she needed to know the other two slightly better. No point in killing them if they had to be around to work with Nalto later. "That's it then. Both of you are dismissed," sandame said politely, then added as Anko turned to head to the door. "Thank you, Anko." "Don't worry," Anko responded casually with a flick of her wrist. "For the chance to torture a princess, I'd do almost anything." Closing the door behind her, she was relieved to hear the amused chuckle from the sandame. Free of the office now and staring at an uncomfortable-looking Harate, she turned back to the more immediate concern of forging a team out of those 3. "I need to know a few things." What exactly do you need to know?" Harate asked, coughing into the rag yet again as he led the way back toward the stairs. "How big you are," Anko stayed sarcastically before snorting. "Your team, what else? I need to know something about them, if I'm gonna be their sensei." "Why?" Harate immediately asked, his tone guarded. "The truth," Anko asked, shooting him an exasperated look. "You're dying. The Hokage knows, Kakashi knows. Probably everyone though, nin, or above. So obviously this isn't temporary, so I need to know what to do with those little shits since I'm gonna be responsible now." Harate paused, staring at her, rather shrewdly, before he coughed. "A brain Shino is capable, he creates plans within plans, and he seems to has almost no emotions. He's brutal, efficient, and at times utterly frightening. He is, however, a bit too dependent on his bugs, even for his family." Anko managed, falling into step behind the man as they descended the stairs. "No personality, ho." "None," Harate said in agreement before coughing once more. Yakamana INO, on the other hand, she appears to be nothing but emotions, competitive, temperamental, and comes across a complete ditz. Color me impressed. She also has more talent at Kenbutsu than anyone I've ever known. Harate explained in response, his tone almost proud. I trained Ho for the last 2 weeks in nothing but Kenbutsu. Other people wouldn't have been able to pick it up. INO grasped everything I taught her easily. Impressive, Anko trolled as they finally left the stairs and started to the front doors. Anything else? She has this odd tendency to notice things that others overlook. I think it comes from her use of the family jutsu, even if she doesn't use them that often. Well, sounds like the makings of a decent team. Anko said in amusement as they finally left the Hokage Tower and stepped out into the streets. Anko-senpai, Harate said, coughing once more. What exactly are you thinking about doing to them? I'm going to force them into the most dangerous team possible. Anko said, blandly raising an eyebrow. You only has 3 days, Harate responded tiredly. How exactly are you going to manage that? Akagahara. Anko said simply, then seeing the surprise on his face cackled, before walking off down the street. Yawning, Nalto's eyes fluttered open wearily, only to squint as the annoying buzzing of his alarm clock reached him. Sitting up, he yawned while knocking his sleeping cap off. Looking around blearily, he sighed, tossing his covers aside before climbing to his feet. As per his newfound habit, Anko insisted on it minus. He grabbed the few kunai near his bed and fired them off blindly at the targets she had affixed to his far wall. He missed each one. Nalto, however, didn't care. He was too busy lamenting his lack of sleep, which had been sadly short supply ever since returning from Fushimi. Apparently Anko had decided, for some unknown reason, to revamp her already insane training practices. The only bright side was that she had adjusted the training time, so that the sun was actually up when they started training. Stumbling his way through the untidy apartment, he managed to clear his room, the hallway, and enter the bathroom with little to no fuss. Shedding his sleek shirt and pants, he turned on the shower, which sputtered to life, and then climbed in. Swaying on his feet, he went through the motions of showering. This served to edge his mind toward consciousness, which sadly prompted his mind onto the same touchy subject he had been dealing with since the news of his bloodline. His family, the ones he pretended not to miss, the ones that he hated and wanted so badly. Were they ashamed of him, or hate him, or was something just wrong with him? Why didn't they want him? They were questions that he had asked thousands of times, and he still had no answers. All he knew was that he felt hurt, betrayed and angry, with nothing to rage against. Shaking it all off and finishing his shower, he tried to finish waking up, but failed to the most part. Searching absently for a towel, he frowned, dimly aware that he had none on hand, which meant he would just have to drip dry. Sourly he stumbled out of the bathroom and out to the kitchen, where he gathered his customary breakfast of ramen and milk before plopping down on a chair. Eating in silence, he paused suddenly, looking around as if remembering something he had forgotten. It was important, but since he couldn't think of anything, he turned his attention back to his meal. A few minutes later, he paused yet again, looking around, sure that he was forgetting something important. Turning back to his meal, he lifted a warm noodle to his mouth and froze the noodles in his stomach, turning to lead. Anko had threatened him with genbutsu training, or more accurately, she had threatened to cast a denbutsu and fill his apartment with something unpleasant. Lowering his noodles, he looked up, blue eyes darting left and then right, like a prey catching the scent of an approaching predator. Everything seemed normal, but Nalto was suddenly very uneasy about his nudity. Covering his crotch, he quickly stood and raced back into his bedroom to frantically cover himself, nearly hurting a very important part of his anatomy. Breathing easier, he walked back out into his apartment and found Anko sitting on his couch, holding a handful of pictures in her hands. Nalto felt his neck hairs stand on end. Anko. Hey, you sensed me, ho? Anko said absently, grinning evilly at the pictures. Not quite a dispel, but that's still an improvement. Are those pictures? Well, of course, you're quite photogenic, Nalto. Anko said, glancing at him, a suggestive grin on her lips as she stood. Nalto blinked, his cheeks coloring at the realization. Anyway, I figure this hammers home the point that if you can't dispel or detect denbutsu, then you're at an attacker's mercy. Anko said, gesturing with the pictures revealing for a moment a stark naked Nalto minus. I guess I should deliver these around the village, maybe that Sakura girl would like to see 'em. Or, ooh, how about INO? Nalto paled and then narrowed his eyes. Oi. Give them to me. No, don't think so. Anko chirped happily. You want 'em, you'll has to come and take 'em. Fine. Nalto roared and darted forward, striking nothing but empty air as Anko dodged and moved toward the open balcony window. Nalto was hot on her heels. INO was not an early riser, as a matter of fact, she was more of a mid-afternoon riser, and any time she was forced out of her warm bed and out into the world at the crack of dawn made her irritable. Harate had known this, but had not really cared too much. Still, he respected her enough to keep team training until later in the afternoon, for which INO had kept from murdering him. Their new, mysterious sensei, however, didn't seem to has any interest in living. INO could still remember her mother's almost apologetic smile this morning, having roused her out of bed. INO had been understandable irate about this. After all, she had only been home one day from her kenbutsu training. Yet her mum had explained that he knew sensei wanted her up and ready to go in the usual training area by sunrise. Muttering phrases that her mum conveniently chose to not hear, INO had gotten ready, grabbed the ninjutsu Harate had loaned her, and then stormed off. She encountered Shino shortly after this, and despite her anger and worry about Harate, they had walked in companionable silence to the training area, where they waited. They had both watched the sky brighten, the sun rise, and listened as both of their stomachs rumbled in hunger. Irritable, INO had preformed the kenbutsu form that Harate had taught her while Shino began talking with his bugs. At almost noon she had stopped and sat under a tree, arms crossed and glaring at the forest, determined to kill their sensei as soon as they arrived. "I'm getting tired of this waiting. I'd like someone to tell us what the hell is going on," INO finally snapped, frustrated beyond belief. "I am sure the answer will come soon," Shino said in his persistently calm manner. INO felt her eye twitch slightly, a sure sign of a building explosion. She mastered herself, however. It was almost pointless to berate the boy since he could say nothing else. Exasperated, she looked at the sky, catching the edge of the sun as it danced through the foliage. Something about that made her blink in realization and look around. Where was Nalto? He should have been there. After all, he was part of their team, and Harate had never mentioned that changing. Thinking about the other blonde, INO wasn't sure whether to be relieved he wasn't around or worried. "INO-san, I has been meaning to discuss something with you." Snapping out of her thoughts, she focused on Shino, wondering what he was about to say. He seemed to be considering his next words, at least until the sound of a small explosion echoed through the air, followed by a smug female voice. "Come on, can't you move any faster? Bitch. Hold still." Another, even louder, male voice called back. INO blinked and got to her feet, looking in the direction the voices had come from. While she couldn't be sure, INO felt confident that the second one belonged to Nalto. This was proven a minute later as a woman, dressed in almost nothing but fishnetting and a trench coat, leapt into the training area. Followed shortly after Nalto, who had a kunai in hand and murder in his eyes. The blonde in question rebounded from his heavy landing and pushed off extremely quickly, while thrusting his kunai to the now grinning woman's face. INO blinked, shocked, and it was over just like that. Suddenly Nalto was on the ground, the woman's foot stomping into his chest while she crossed her arms. "PFFH, you must be getting tired, you brat. Normally I'd has to kill 4 or 5 clones before this. You stupid psychotic bitsy oomph," Nalto said, choking off as the foot stomped on his chest yet again. Hey, INO said, startled, reaching for her ninjutsu. The woman turned her attention to the girl and INO started to unseize her sword, only she froze halfway through for no apparent reason. The woman in question, however, grinned brighter than ever, which somehow made her even more scary. "Careful, princess, you could hurt yourself with that." INO tried to say something but found her mouth clamped shut without any apparent means, which frightened her. "Relax, that's just a paralyzing jutsu, it'll wear off in a few minutes," the woman explained, stepping off of Nalto to stretch. "I take it you're the Yakamana girl. Which means..." At this the woman turned her attention to a still calm Shino. "That little bugger is a brown Shino." "Oi! What the hell is wrong with you?" Nalto shouted, hopping to his feet, his face angry. The woman absently smacked him upside his head, her grin never fading as she looked back at INO. "In case you're wondering, I'm Maitreshi Anko, your new sensei." INO couldn't help but make an incredulous noise at that announcement, which seemed to irritate Anko, who threw a kunai which seemed to come from nowhere minus within inches of INO's ear. "I has a low tolerance to bullshit and I has no problem killing either of you. I told you she was a psycho," Nalto mumbled, crossing his arms and glaring at Anko. The room was simple, a stone floor with various items leaning against the walls and white tapestries hanging down at intervals. A red carpet tripped in white, ran the full length of the floor from the entrance to the raised section, where a high-backed seat and curved desk rested. It was simple and yet at the same time it was intimidating. It was a formal meeting hall, used only on the rare occasion of a truly important event. The naming of a Hokage, a private marriage between two high-ranking ninja peace treaties, declarations of war. The sandam, who was sitting behind the desk, smoking his pipe while pretending to be the iron foundation that the village needed, had used this hall for all of those things. He had named the Yondem Hokage here, he had seen the marriage of several powerful ninja sign several peace treaties and decelerations of wars. So much time he mused before shaking all of that off and focusing on the selected ninja before him. These 20 were the chosen senseis of the current group of rookie genin, each was serious except to one who was busy, eating dango and trying to flirt with the Unbu commander. The sandam felt a twinge of various emotions seeing her, but kept those carefully in check. It should be obvious why you've all be assembled, the Hokage finally said, staring out at them closely, his memory flashing back to when most of them were genin themselves. Taking a puff he blew a smoke ring, dispelling the memories. Of course Hokage-sama, Kurenai said respectfully, almost brimming with energy and pride. The sandam offered her an indulgent smile, knowing that she was anxious to prove her worth as a sensei. So which of the newly graduated genin are ready? He was sorely disappointed when only two people stepped forward, one an attractive female with the red eyes, the other wearing a brown trench coat and eating dango. Well, Kurenai. Anko. Are there any genin that you'd recommend? Studying them, the old man took a puff on his pipe before sighing. Please remember that it's recommended that they has at least 8 missions. Hokage-sama. One question. Kurenai said respectfully, keeping from glancing at the woman beside her. Mitarashi Anko is only the sensei through Azumaki Nalto, who I doubt could handle this exam minus. Excuse me. Anko interrupted, staring at Kurenai. You don't think Nalto couldn't handle this stupid test? Oh. That's right. I can see how someone with your record might find it difficult, Yuiku. What was that? Kurenai said slowly, a killer intent beginning to radiate off her. Nothing, Anko smirked, raising an eyebrow. Just pointing that to someone that suffered setbacks, the Chunin exams could be viewed as dangerous. Are you trying to pick a fight? Kurenai snapped, glaring at the older woman. Anko, however, looked away, addressing the Hokage. My Solida has completed a B-ranked and an A-ranked mission. Team Harate has managed at least one successful B-rank mission. Shooting Kurenai a look, she snorted. These are 3 genin that has been trained by a former Unbu captain as well as a special nin and not some wannabe jonin. My team has handled an A-ranked mission and several C-ranked missions. Kurenai shouted before stepping up to point at Anko. Hokage-sama, if you let this woman Solida and that team compete, then what message are you sending? Besides, don't you think she might be just trying to remove them? We all remember Ho Genin test and Ho Sense minus. Enough. The Hokage suddenly said, his tone radiating authority. You are both grown women and jonin. Any problems that you two have should not interfere or cloud your judgment. Am I clear? As crystal. Anko said, her eyes almost narrowing. When Kurenai nodded, albeit reluctantly, the sandam took a puff on his pipe, attempting to ease his heart back to normal. He sensed Kakashi's focus shifting to him, and he made it a point of pretending to be fine. Starting with Kurenai-sanjen. The woman in question lifted her fingers into the proper position and almost spat out the names hatefully while glaring at Anko, who was happily munching her dango once more. The Kurenai-led Team 7, Uchiha Sasuke, Inzuka Kiba, and Hano Sakura. Under the name of Yui Kurenai, I nominate them to take the Chunin selection exam. Anko-san. Yay, yay. Anko, Team 9 formerly Heights. Nalto, INO, Shino. They can all take the exam. Anko said, waving a hand, before putting her dango up and stretching. Are we done now? I think this should be done properly, the sandam said, locking his eyes with Anko. The woman stared back, her face carefree as always, but he saw her uneasiness. Then, smiling sweetly, she put her hand into the proper position. Sure, whatever. The Anko-led, formerly Harate-led, Team 9, Azumaki Nalto, obeying Shino and Yakamana INO. Under the name Mitarashi Anko, the same as Tumai. Oh. Right. Nodding, the Hokage looked at the other gathered jonins, tone serious. Anyone else? No. Very well. We are done for now. Dismissed. They all did just that with Anko trailing behind, but eventually they were alone and the sandam felt himself slump into his seat slightly. Kakashi was there almost instantly, placing a cup on the desk before him. Hokage-sama, you can't keep this up much longer. Chuckling, the Hokage sipped at the herbal drink, appreciating the medicine as always. Setting it down, he looked up at the masked man, radiating confidence that only he could manage. Kakashi-kun, I will be fine. Do we has any word on Freya? Well, we've whispered in the right places that it's urgent that you see him. About the Yondem's legacy, Kakashi said, shaking his head. As the word? Nothing yet. But knowing him, he'll probably just turn up. Yes. He was always surprising, the sandam agreed before sighing heavily. As if by unspoken command, the Unbu commander left and the sandam closed his eyes, wondering just how much longer he could keep going. The only answer he could find was long enough. Why do you think she kidnapped this Konohamaru kid? INO muttered as they moved among the trees. Oi, pause, like she said, she was drunk. Nalto responded irritably, keeping pace beside her. Shino fought the grimace as he sensed yet another argument building between the two. His head was already throbbing from the migraine he was developing from their arguments, which were getting worse every time. If INO suggested one place, Nalto would argue and had to be dragged kicking to check it out. If Nalto suggested something, INO would do the exact same thing. It was like the last mission they had been on together, only worse. No, I mean why, INO said in annoyance. He's the Hokage's grandson, only an insane person would actually kidnap him cause they were drunk. At what point did she seem sane to you? Nalto muttered. She was just trying to scare us, INO snapped. Shino almost but not quite whimpered as his headache increased in strength. At least, however, they sounded more like a married couple now than the cats and dogs from earlier. We cannot risk it, INO-san. My family says that she came by here not too long ago. Oi, I still don't get how you can tell that sort of thing. Nalto said, sounding thoroughly confused. My bugs sustained themselves on chakra, Shino explained, glancing at the blonde behind him. Thus they can distinguish between people's chakra. Since she did use chakra, my bugs were exposed to it and they learned that scent. Ook, Nalto said slowly, clearly not understanding. So they're following Anko's chakra. Correct, Shino said, looking forward once more. However, the scent is becoming weaker due to how much time has passed since she traveled this way. Then why are we going so slow? Nalto said in frustration, darting forward. Hey. Nalto, get your ass back here. INO shouted angrily. Let him go, Shino said calmly, resigned to the fact that they would never be a true team. According to my family, he's going in the correct direction. That blonde jackass, INO grumbled in response. 10 minutes later they reached the edge of the forest they had been traveling through, revealing Nalto, who was glaring at Anko, who was munching dangos happily. Landing adroitly, followed by INO, Shino also noted a bound and unconscious child at her feet being used as a footstool. Turning away from that, he glanced at the barbed wire fence behind the woman. It seemed rather ominous actually. Why was there a fence here separating two sections of forest? About time, Anko said, finishing off her dango. Yeesh. Thought you'd get here couple hours ago. Yeah, Nalto said in response. Oi, so what now? Anko flashed them a smile, before climbing at her feet while holding a length of rope, which was attached tot, he bundle at her feet. Well, I am taking this runt home, then getting some sake. You guys are going in there to find your applications for the tune-in exam in 3 days. Really? Nalto said excitedly. INO made an uneasy noise while Shino arched an eyebrow, which was more due to the way Nalto shifted from petulant to excited. Only early he had been lamenting and berating Anko, and now, he looked as if he was about to hug the woman. It was an odd dynamic that worried him for some reason. Yeah, like how Ate thought you're ready. Anko said as if in exasperation. All you have to do now is decide to take the exam or not. If you do, fill the applications out and hand them in at room 301 at 4 p.m. day after tomorrow. Yes. One step closer to Hokage. So, where exactly did you put them? INO asked, sounding annoyed and not bothering to hide it. You'll have to work that out to yourselves, Anko said, simply shooting her a sharp look. So you guys has a good day. Turning, the woman started to walk away, dragging a squirming Konohamaru behind her. Before she paused and looked back over his shoulder at INO. "Oh, and princess, try not to get yourself killed." Shino winced, watching the woman casually continue on her way, leaving a now fuming INO behind. INO felt a hint of anxiety forming in her chest, staring at that fence, topped with barbed wire, and beyond that to the forbidding trees. Maybe she was merely projecting her own feelings, but it definitely felt malevolent. Shifting her attention to Nalto, she was relieved to see what appeared to be uncertainty on his face. "So, like, what you do think?" INO finally asked, glancing at Shino and then back to the forest. "It would appear we has no choice," Shino said calmly. "Oi, it's just some scary woods," Nalto said boisterously, moving toward the fence slightly. "Idiot, look at those signs," INO snapped, gesturing at the battered and weather-worn signs before them. "This place is dangerous." "Bah, it's just a mind game," Nalto said in dismissal, jumping to the top of the fence, careful to not touch the barbed wire. INO shot Shino an exasperated look, only to sigh as Shino followed the blonde's lead. Shaking her head, knowing this would not lead to anything worthwhile, followed both boys. Landing carefully, preforming a balancing act to keep from getting her feet sliced up from the barbed wire. Annoyed, she shifted her attention away from the immediate area to a splotch of red, and an outcropping of some sort. "Oi, doesn't look so bad," Nalto said, nodding in her peripheral vision. "I don't think minus," INO started to say, only to blink in surprise as he jumped off the fence and fell through a hidden pit. Nalto. Jumping down alongside Shino, they both peered into the hole to find Nalto spread eagle, holding himself a hairsbreadth over several sharpened bamboo poles. "Kami," INO said, kneeling beside the hole. "Are you okay, Nalto?" Let me think," Nalto shouted back sarcastically. "I'm in a hole, with sharp, pointy objects pointed at me." "Yeah, I'm just great, INO." "Well, I was just asking," INO shouted back before looking at Shino. "So, how should we get him out?" Shino, however, was denied his chance to respond when Nalto suddenly exploded from the pit and landed in a crouch. "Oi, when I get my hands on that psychotic bitch, I'm going to shove those damn dango sticks up her ass." INO blinked, staring at him in surprise. The way he talked about so causally assaulting his own sensei frightened her. Then again, the way Anko had treated him, she could understand it, but still disturbing. Shaking it off, she turned her mind back to the more serious problem. "So like, where do you think she put those applications?" "Most likely in the center," Shino answered stoically as ever. "If we go there, we may find what we are looking for. So we just go in a straight line," Nalto said decisively, climbing to his feet while stretching. "Weren't you paying attention?" INO suddenly demanded, infuriated by what he was saying. "I doubt that we can just, like, walk through this. This place is dangerous, we could get ourselves killed." "Oi, we got to get those applications," Nalto retorted, rounding on her. "Going straight is the best answer. That ranks right up there with counting to 3 as a plan." INO snapped in frustration. "Do you has a better idea?" INO narrowed her gaze on him, but remained silent. "Aha. So we go straight," Nalto exclaimed, setting off fearlessly. "He does has a point," Shino said calmly as well. "The quickest path is a straight line." "I'm sure," INO said, climbing to her feet to trudge after Shino and Nalto. Not that she didn't trust the blonde somewhat, but there was no telling what that crazy woman had done. Hell, from the way Anko had treated them so far, INO wouldn't have been surprised if she was seriously trying to kill them. Fuming and worrying over the various problems they were now facing, INO almost didn't feel it, the brush of strong yet giving thread. Yet she did feel it, and she froze, her memory replaying a moment not so long ago when she had snapped something similar. Then she heard it, the vague sound of another set of wires being snapped. Looking up, she found Nalto frozen as well, the obvious source of the now compounded blunder. Her first instinct was the shout at him, but her second instinct, which came from the fact that she could already hear the rushing weapons, was to move. Then she was left in stunned amazement as Nalto shoved Shino behind him, apparently squaring up to the incoming hail of weapons. Futon de topper. There was a soft roar, which quickly grew in strength until suddenly everything in Nalto's path bent and swayed as if hit by a wind from a tornado. Branches snapped off, there was the deep crack of trees that would not bend, and most notable was the hail of kunai, which twisted and turned away to embedded themselves in all sorts of locations. The mysterious storm persisted for another minute and then quickly died, the accompanying noise dying to a soft murmur. Relaxing her muscles, for the moment INO sighed in relief, then glared at Nalto. "Let's go straight," she said. "Oi, you're the one that set off that first trap." Nalto snapped, rounding on her. "Only cause I was distracted thinking about your sensor." INO shouted angrily. "Whose fault is that?" "Yours." "Oh yeah. Yeah. Fine. If you don't want me here, I'm leaving." Nalto shouted and then turning stormed off. "Fine. Go." INO shouted, waving her hands after him before turning to storm off in the opposite direction. "That stupid minus," Nalto grumbled, leaping from branch to branch, trying desperately to find a suitable what INO exactly was. All he really knew was that she was stupid and got his last nerve. Angry and fuming, he began to grin manically, picturing INO suffering some of the tortures that Anko had first threatened him with. Would serve her right, Nalto agreed, nodding smugly. Hearing the sound of yet another tripwire being snapped, he dodged the incoming hail by instinct, then hearing the hiss of a exploding note, scrambled onward, snapping another 2 wires and hastily dodged the hail from the weapons. Damn it. Landing heavily with a stumble, he looked behind him at the ruined path, scratching at the back of his head. Maybe this place is a little dangerous." Nalto nodded, then snorted, turning to walk on, still not any reason to be afraid though. Smug that he wouldn't fall for any more traps, he boldly began to whistle. At least until the world flashed and turned upside down. Wah! Nalto managed as he suddenly found himself frantically clawing at the ground to keep from falling with his hair on end while weapons fell into the sky. He thought briefly of clutching at the escaping weapons, but didn't dare for fear of falling. Below him the darkening sky stretched onwards, and he knew that if he tried to move he would fall away from the earth completely. He could already feel a headache forming from all of the blood rushing to his head, which even Nalto knew was not a good thing. Frantic now, he began trying to focus on anything that would allow him to handle this situation. Sadly, though not surprisingly, Anko had never prepared him for this situation. "Okay," he said through a forced calm while keeping his eyes squeezed shut upside down. "So, obviously this is like tree walking." Nodding, he molded the chakra to his feet and carefully climbed back to his feet, relieved to find that it was working. Opening his eyes tentatively, he looked at his feet glued to the earth, and then let out a breath even as his ears began to pound from the blooding racing to his head. "So now." The blonde paused and considered, feeling odd, as if something about this situation was even more off than the sheer face that up was down and down was up. Where had he felt this before? Then slowly, through the headache of having his blood rush to his head, he realized this was what it had felt like when Anko had put him in a venbutsu that morning. Which, well, it didn't help him any really. After all, he couldn't dispel them, so it didn't do him too good to know it was a venbutsu. Maybe storming off on his own hadn't been such a good idea, after all. Not that it was doing him much good to just stand there and think about that sort of thing, but it was getting difficult to think with the blood rushing to his head. Okay. So, I'm supposed to try and stop my chakra and disrupt it. Only I'm not sure how to do that. Thinking he could see no way out of this. Damn it, if he could just disrupt his chakra. Well, maybe if someone else was around they could do it to him, but there wasn't anybody around. Then realization hit him, his cave bunshine. They were people, sorta, and they could use chakra. If he made one and had it. Mold its chakra into his. Would that work? Well, he wouldn't know until he tried molding his chakra. He concentrated, producing one, which promptly scrambled to hold onto the earth. Oi, it's just an illusion. Now stand up and try to mold your chakra into me. The clone blinked, then asked, which sadly didn't seem to work. Then in another flash, the world was right side up and vertigo seized the blonde and he toppled to his hands and knees, taking several deep breaths. Recovered, he shakily climbed back to his feet and looked around to the source of the venbutsu. Spotting the seal, he cursed, nearly slapping his forehead at the obviousness of it. He did take some pride in the fact that he had figured out how to handle genbutsu, but still he wouldn't have fallen through it in the first place if Shino or INO had been around. Frowning, he looked at his idle clone, as if holding a private debate, which in a way he was. The simple fact was that he needed his team. If he wasn't careful, we would end up dead, and they were probably already facing that situation. Oi, you go on ahead and set off traps and etc. So I have some idea of what to expect, Nalto finally said, turning as he clone took off. Grumbling, the real Nalto set off once more at a brisk pace, retracing his steps, hoping that he could come across his team. Well, probably be best to create more clones and have them help, which of course is what he did. When he did find them, 10 minutes later, he found them struggling against a group of puppets. Shino was preforming admirable, his bugs clogging the joints and rendering them unmoving, while INO's sword was dancing around her, literally, deflecting anything the puppets shot at her before cutting them down. It actually appeared that they didn't need him, which troubled Nalto. Just what did that say about him, if the two that were supposed to be weaker than him were doing better than he was? Then he saw it, two traps springing at the same time, and he acted without thinking. Two cave bunshines popped into existence, each preforming a kawerimi with a startled INO and Shino, which allowed two massive logs to complete their swing safely. Then on the heels of this, Nalto concentrated once more and pulled off yet another futon, they topper, scattering the remaining attack puppets into the forest and nearly knocking both of his teammates over in the process. Minus finished and grinning, Nalto broke cover and landed between the two. Hi. Looked like you guys needed some help. Looked like. INO repeated dryly, putting her sword up, fixing him with an intense glare. We were nearly killed. You had to go storming off in a huff, leaving us alone in a forest with so many damn traps that it's a wonder we're still alive. Oi, I just saved your asses and now you're gonna blame me. Nalto shouted back, eye twitching. Might I suggest that instead of arguing we attempt to figure out what exactly we should do now? Shino said softly, moving between them to act as a mediator. Fine, INO sniffed, crossing her arms. Whatever, Nalto nodded, kicking at the ground in annoyance, willing to back off for the moment. INO still annoyed the hell out of him, though, and he was seriously considering shaving her head. It does appear that we are out of our element, Shino continued stoically as ever. Perhaps we should withdraw and see if we cannot speak with someone about this. You want to give up? Nalto said, blankly staring at the boy, and then glanced at a startled, but relieved, looking INO. It is the only logical choice, Shino said with a small shrug. We cannot function properly in this environment, thus the wisest course is to seek help and try again later. Like, yeah, INO said, almost uncertain. Besides, why should we have to trek through this insane forest to get those stupid applications? I mean, I know I can handle myself a bit better, but I don't think we're ready for this exam. Nalto blinked, looking between them, his stomach churning at what he was hearing. They wanted to give up and run away. How could they? No, why would they? Frowning, he absently clenched his fist, his thoughts on everything he had heard and felt in those few minutes focusing into one thought: not giving up. I can't believe. You seriously want to go back and give up? Well, screw that. Lifting his head, he met both of their gazes, his voice strained with anger and determination. I'm tired of people telling me what I can't do. That I can't be a ninja. That I can't reach my dreams. I'm going to get to that damn application, I'm gonna sign it and I'm going to present it. And then I'm going to keep kicking asses until that old man has to make me Hokiv. Like, you seriously believe you can do that? No, I know we can. Nalto said fiercely. If we can stop fighting each other and work together, we can kick this forest's ass. Maybe, Shino allowed. Oi, we're a team, there is no maybe about it. Nalto said, glaring at the boy. So are we going to get those applications or not? Damn it, INO muttered, sounding almost happy. Let's go. When the idiot's right, he's right. Hey. Nalto shouted, fighting his urge to stick his tongue out at her when he noticed what appeared to be a teasing smile. Instead he looked at Shino, asking without saying a word if he was with them or not. The bug user nodded slightly, hands in his pockets. If we are going to be properly rested tomorrow, we need to move now. Right. Nalto said excitedly, before scratching the back of his head. So triangle formation. It seems a good idea, who should be point. H. Nalto blinked, his mind finally catching up with what was going on. I guess. You. Cause you know. You'd notice the traps first. Or at least before Blondie over there. What was that? INO shot back, before flipping her hair back over her shoulder. You're a blonde too, you know. Oi, but I'm a guy blonde, Nalto shot back cheekily as they took off. Means I'm 1% smarter than girl blondes. Does not. Does so. Take it back, or so help me I'm going to minus. See, that proves it. You can't even think of a good threat. Nalto cut her off, laughing. Ugh. Anko was drunk. Not fall down drunk, and not slightly buzzed, but almost a happy medium. There was a drunken sway to her walk, a slurring of her speech, almost a sense of detachment from the world. She was no less deadly, of course, but still she was drunk, and her reaction time was somewhat off kilter. Nobody, however, could say she was a quiet drunk. Singing, shouting, torturing Kakashi, who had unwisely agreed to a date to his book minus it had all been an event of the night. Now of course back in her apartment, settling into her third night of blissful sleep, she had set about devouring her entire stock of dango. Therein was her first mistake. For of course she was by far too idealistic to believe that in the nearly 12 hours that she had been out Nalto and his team would not have returned to the village. Or more to the point that Nalto, the #1 prankster in Konoha, would not get revenge for tossing them into a kagahara. It was not until her stomach gave an ominous rumbling after 3 hours of devouring dango that she realized that something could be wrong. Abandoning her meal and climbing to her feet, she felt a sharp pain and paused, her suspicious nature coming to the forefront. Swaying her way through the living room and into the kitchen, she swept her gaze around the counters and the off-white refrigerator. Flipping a light on, she stumbled into the kitchen, giving it all a much closer inspection. Nothing seemed out of place, nor did the dango appear tampered with. Yet somehow she knew that something had been done, something that was about to have very disastrous results. For her stomach suddenly felt like lead. Exerting her will over her now nearly traitorous stomach, Anko settled her gaze on her trash can. Walking over, a hand resting on her stomach, with sweat standing out on her skin, she lifted the lid. There on the very top of the trash was a box, an over-the-counter box of medicine. Picking the box up, she began to read, slowly working out the words. Konoha's #1. Extra strength. Chocolate. Laxative. Anko paused, frowning, as the last word took a moment to register. Then as the words reached her, she felt a sharp pain shoot through her and she dropped the box and, eyes wide, the drunk Jonin spun and made a mad dash for the bathroom. After nearly tearing the bathroom door off the hinges, and then slamming the bathroom door shut, it was at this point that Anko decided she would have to kill. No, use a spoon to cut the heart out of Nalto. Why? Because she discovered belatedly, her second mistake: she had not checked the toilet seat, the plastic wrap. Chapter 15. The First Test, Espionage. Nalto woke up slowly, feeling that something was most definitely wrong. It wasn't that he could feel it, but he just sensed it. He checked to make sure that he was indeed still in his bed, then slowly he opened his eyes a fraction of an inch. It took him a moment to realize that the ceiling overhead was a different color than the one at his apartment. That was when he heard the giggling whispers that girls so often used. Alarm bells started going off in his mind and he lifting his head to see what his surroundings were. It was a room in one of the orphanages, but more importantly, it was a room filled with giggling, staring girls. Nalto's first instinct was to bolt out of the bed, when he realized that he was naked under his blanket, which didn't matter too much since the blanket itself was actually nailed to the frame and wasn't going anywhere. Nalto managed articulately and then looked at one of the girls who was giggling big time. Do you think I could borrow your sheet? Or a pillow? No, the girl said amid more laughter. Blushing now, Nalto grew self-conscious, twisting onto his side and trying to think of a way out of this. Well, he still had his pillow, so at least that was something. That crisis solved, he turned his mind toward who had done this to him. He had a suspicion that it was Anko, but he wasn't sure. Then, remembering he had a room full of giggling witnesses, he smiled slightly. Oi, did any of you see who did this? There was chorus of no's and then one girl nodded and shyly climbed off her bed at the far end of the room and approached him. Seeing her, Nalto sat up as best he could, embarrassed at the way some of the girls blushed at his chest. I saw who did it, the girl said once she had gotten to the end of his bed. She had black hair and she wore fishnetting. Minus at that the girl flushed slightly. Anko, Nalto grumbled and then noticed she was holding a familiar-looking box. Oi, what's that? She asked me to give this to you when you woke up. Said, something about karma and forced ingestion. Taking the box, Nalto examined it and then gulped, paling. It was the same box of laxatives he had used on Anko last night. Mouth going dry, he shifted uneasily on his bed, praying that she was just trying to psych him out, but he knew better. Modesty forgotten, Nalto tore his way out of the bed and amid twittering laughter, whistles and blushes raced out of the room. Halfway down the stairs he slammed into the woman that was in charge of the orphanage and then continued on his way, tears in his eyes as he raced out into the street and tried to make it home before he lost all control. The entire way he cursed the named Mitarashi Anko. Inoichi chuckled to himself as he scanned the doke section of Shinobi Digest, listening to the even more humorous shouting match between his wife and his sweet, though temperamental daughter. Sometimes he seriously wondered why he and his wife had been blessed with such a daughter. Setting the digest aside for a moment, he poured himself yet another cup of coffee and then turned back to his reading just as his daughter entered the kitchen. He listened as she moved about, muttering under her breath, while trying to find breakfast and fasten the sword Harate had presented her. Inoichi wisely kept his amusement hidden until his daughter, with a muttered curse, finally managed to hook the belt of the sword into the proper position around her waist. "So, this is the big day, ho," Inoichi finally said, looking up at her. "My lil girl's becoming a tune-in." "Yeah," Ino snorted, looking around impatiently at the table and counter before grabbing a cup from the sink and filling it with orange juice. "So, you got everything? Know where you're supposed to go?" "Yes," Ino said, with such longer suffering, but Inoichi knew she was nervous. He watched as she started to check her watch, then froze when she nearly spilt her drink. "You've got plenty of time," Inoichi said, chuckling as he turned back to the digest he had been reading. "So, I guess Shino and Anzai wasn't it minus are waiting for you." "Anzai," Ino repeated blankly before sighing in exasperation. "Like he's so not an issue now." "Ho." Inoichi managed, turning to stare at his daughter. "Not an issue. He is your teammate, right? Like, not anymore. Get with the times, Nalto minus." "Nalto. Have I met him?" No." Ino said, then looked at her father guardedly. "Why?" "No reason," Inoichi lied expertly, hackles rising at the merest hint of an unknown boy around his precious daughter. "So, what's he like?" Ino said with a shrug before checking her weapons pouch as if she was afraid she had forgotten something. "Guy like? Sorta annoying. Blonde hair, electric blue eyes, whisker marks. You know, I'm not so sure I like the idea of you taking the exam with some boy I've never met." "Daddy, he's just a teammate." Ino shot back, a slightly worried look on her face. Inoichi said, while nodding. "This Nalto is a boy your age. He's got guy parts. This is a terrible idea. Dad." Ino shouted in exasperation and then rounded on her mom, who chose that moment to enter the kitchen. "Mom, tell him that me taking the exam with Nalto is no big deal." "Honey, it's no big deal minus wait, who's Nalto?" "Our daughter's teammate," Inoichi said, looking up at his wife. "He's got blonde hair and electric blue eyes." "Oh." The Yamanaka matriarch said, arching an eyebrow as Ino threw her hands up in frustration. "Does he has a last name?" "I don't believe this," Ino shouted, stomping her foot angrily. "He's my teammate, okay? I went to the academy with him. It'll be fine, he's okay, you know. This isn't the drama you're making it out to be." "I thought you said he was annoying," Inoichi said, suddenly finding the whole situation funny. "She called him annoying," his wife added, unable to hide her grin. "This is serious." "I know minus," Inoichi started to agree, only to stop and watch his daughter storm out the back door in a huff. Suddenly he started laughing. "Be careful. We love you. Even if you are annoying," his wife added while laughing. "Shut up," Ino called back, as the door slammed shut behind her. Azumaki Nalto was in a bad mood. This was not a good thing. Much the same way as when Anko was in a good mood. It was a cosmic law, like the one that said the sun rose in the east and set in the west. The natural order of the world seemed unbalanced when such an event occurred. Shinobi and civilians also had a tendency to scatter when such an event occurred. Ino and Shino had both been surprised at the malevolence that radiated from the orange-clad boy, but Nalto had paid them very little heed. He was too busy mulling over Anko's prank and how best to get her back to such an atrocity. The leading contenders were itching powder in her underwear, which he thought she might not actually wear, minus and putting a hair removal chemical into her shampoo or conditioner. "That'd show her," Nalto said without thinking, grinning almost viciously at the image of a bald Anko. Then suddenly he realized that it would probably be best to do both at the same time. "Hell yeah. You're still loud. Turning at the familiar-sounding voice, Nalto found himself facing Kiba, who was flanked by a bored Sasuke and an irritated Sakura. "Oi, Kiba." Then before he could continue his greeting, he was promptly shoved aside as INO moved to hug Sasuke. Stumbling, he shot the girl a glare, then felt a very strong Earth 2 plunger kunai into Sasuke. Shaking that off, he turned his attention to Sakura, only to be unsurprisingly ignored as the two girls got into a shouting match over Sasuke. Uchiha Sasuke. Seething, Nalto turned and started walking, his bad mood worsening. Why was it always that pathetic bastard? What was so damn special about that prick? So what if he was tall, a genius and had a famous clan? He was nothing. Nalto could take him with one hand tied behind his back while eating ramen. Needless to say, Sasuke pissed the blonde off something fierce. "Hey Nalto," Kiba said loudly from back near Shino. "Sakura said that she saw you and INO shopping together a while back." "Ho." Nalto said, turning to glare at the boy. "Oh. Yeah, she dragged me clothes shopping. What the hell are you saying?" INO shouted, while choking him from behind. Naturally, he was clutching at her arm, kicking his legs and trying to free himself. "Oh, so it was you. See, Sasuke-kun, I told you they were dating," Sakura said sweetly. Nalto choked even louder as INO's arm squeezed his neck even tighter. "It was not a date." INO shouted loudly, "His jacket was a mess and I was tired of seeing orange." Sakura said, grinning. "You don't have to lie, we understand. Plus, we all know what they say about clothes shopping, so it's pointless." What? INO, stop, they're often they say." Nalto managed gasping out the last few words as INO finally released her hold and turned away in a huff. Okay, he was seriously going to has to find out why in the hell she could treat him like that. Sakura, grinning in a rather annoying fashion, nodded seriously, holding a finger up. "Clothes shopping, kissing friends, shoe shopping more than kissing friends, jewelry shopping minus. Run." Kiba shouted, supplying his own unique perspective on Sakura's scale of intimacy. Sakura shot him a glare, then lifted her palms up and closed her eyes as she continued. "Basically, if you're shopping for clothes together, your boyfriend and girlfriend." "What?" Nalto shouted, eyes wide. "Stop lying, you big forehead." INO shouted as well. "I'm not lying, INO pig." Sakura shouted back, looking affronted. "Ask anybody." As both girls squared off, while Kiba and the Kama retreated and Shino, along with Sasuke, calmly walked away, Nalto ran his hands through his hair, trying to wrap his mind around the concept that Sakura had just told him. She had to be lying, right? But Sakura never, well, okay, she lied sometimes minus, still she had to be wrong. Only. She was never wrong. So, was she telling the truth? Why would she lie about something like that? To annoy INO, of course. Realization dawning on him, along with the anxiety that had been building relaxing, he turned to explain this to INO when he found them in mid-fight. "Girls," the blonde muttered in frustration before turning to continue walking, growing even more irritated when he realized that Sasuke was walking beside him. That was okay, though soon enough they'd be in the exams, and Nalto was sure he'd get the chance to kick the prick's ass. He smiled cruelly, imagining some very vicious things he would do to the pretty boy. "Is there any reason you're grinning like a maniac?" Sasuke suddenly asked, his tone bored. "Yeah," Nalto said brightly. "I was just thinking about how much I'm looking forward to kicking your ass." "Hey, sure," Sasuke said, not glancing away from the building. "A loser like you couldn't even scratch my forehead protector." "Oi, I hit your chin," Nalto shouted, glaring at the Uchiha. "Lucky shot," Sasuke returned, glaring back. "Lucky shot," Nalto said angrily, and then grabbing the boy's arm jerked him around so that they were face to face. "You want to fight right now, you prick? Wanna see how much of a lucky shot it was? If you think you can do it," Sasuke said challengingly. "Sasuke-kun, Nalto," INO suddenly said in trepidation. "I don't think you should minus." "Be quiet, Yamanaka," Sasuke snapped without looking away from Nalto. "This is between real ninja, not wannabes." "Oi, she is a ninja and don't you tell her to be quiet," Nalto snapped, shudging the genius roughly. "What are you going to do about it?" Sasuke snapped back, shudging Nalto. "This," Nalto shouted, and within the space of a heartbeat, he had a kunai in hand matched by Sasuke. "Stop." Two girls shouted at the same time as a swarm of bugs found their way to the two arguing boys. Nalto froze, eyes never leaving the other boy's face, his kunai an inch from Sasuke's cheek. Sasuke's own kunai was an inch from Nalto's stomach. It was one of those tense moments where all of Nalto's training from Anko demanded to strike, craved it. This conflict is pointless, Shino said in that bland tone he always seemed to use. However, if you wish to continue, then might I suggest you do it in the exam? Sasuke said, slipping his weapon back into his holster. Whatever, Nalto muttered, roughly pocketing his kunai while giving Sasuke a dark glare. Oi! Did a swarm of bugs just come out of your coat? Kiba suddenly shouted, breaking the serious moment between the two groups. Sasuke, however, turned and stormed away from the two teams, prompting Sakura and Kiba to follow. Nalto remained where he was for several minutes studying the group and then snorted, following after them, not saying another word. Mentally, however, he had decided to skin Sasuke the first chance he got. Flip. 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 Anko caught her kunai on the downward spin, balancing it precariously on the tip of her finger. A slight frown marred her features. She was disappointed that she could still only manage 4 flips before having to catch the weapon. Sighing, she pushed her finger yet again, launching the weapon into the air, where it flipped 4 times before she caught it yet again. Well, at least I don't have the idiot squad around anymore, the attractive assassin muttered, remembering with great annoyance Team 7. She couldn't decide who was worse, the smug slut Kurenai, or that smug prick of an Uchiha. Anger welling up inside her, Anko hurled her kunai away, coming close to piercing the crotch of one Hata Kakashi, who didn't even look up from his book. Aha, I hope that wasn't because of anything I did. Maybe, Anko muttered, glaring at the masked man. So, why are you here? Kakashi nodded, looking up from his book as he joined her in leaning against the wall. To let you know that the Hokage would like to speak with you after the first test. What does that old man want now? Anko grumbled, crossing her arms and scowling. I'm not at liberty to say, Kakashi said, before pushing off the wall. Anyway, say hi to Nalto for me. I has to get back to work. Sure, Anko muttered, her eyes dropping to his butt. By the way, nice ass, Kakashi. Whether it was due to her comment, or his own mysterious nature, the silver-haired Jonin promptly disappeared with a puff of smoke and a choking sound. Sighing, she produced yet another kunai and, with a flick of her wrist, balanced it on her finger, then turned her attention to the far doorway. Seconds later, Team 9 entered, a scowling Nalto in the lead, heading directly for her. So, I guess Nalto made it ho. Ho. INO managed with a blink. Nothing, Princess, Anko shot back as she slipped the kunai back into her weapons pouch. So, you guys ready for this test? Of course, INO said, glancing at Shino, who merely nodded. Nalto, however, remained silent and fixed her with a look of intense dislike. You stripped me naked, nailed my sheets to the bed, and put me in a room full of girls while I was sleeping. You can't blame me, you stupid brat. You started it with the laxatives, Anko responded dryly. You force-fed me laxatives while I was sleeping, Nalto said in a forced calm. You put plastic over the toilet, Anko answered, smirking. What are you going to do about it? Nalto paused as if giving her question serious thought, and then suddenly lunged at her. Anko of course dodged the first punch, blocked the kick, caught him with a palm heel in the chin. Things went on in this vein, with Nalto actually managing to hit her shoulder once minus for another minute or so before Anko finally pinned him to the floor with her foot. Hard. Well, you seem fired up, Anko chirped, ignoring the shocked look on INO's face and her heavy breathing. Instead, she focused on the feeling in her chest, which she took to be pride, that stemmed from her student finally being able to hit her. Never mind that it was just a glancing blow and she had just barely been paying attention. Any lingering doubts she might have had about Nalto or her own teaching methods were erased. Anko-sensei. INO managed, respectfully looking at the woman. We has to take the exam now. She is correct, Shino added, in what sounded like worry. Easing her foot off of the blonde, she grinned, watching as he angrily climbed to his feet and glared at her with more malice than she thought possible. When this exam is over, I'm going to kick your ass. Sure you will. Don't go making promises you can't keep, Anko taunted, amused at the way his left eye twitched. The blonde even opened his mouth to shout something at her, possibly even attack her, when INO slapped a hand over his mouth and with Shino's help dragged him through the doors into the examination room. Anko just smiled. Good luck, Ototo. Then laughing she turned and walked away, wondering if 3 in the afternoon was too early to start drinking. Once beyond the doors, Nalto jerked himself out of his team's grasp and rounded on them, an angry brioche on his lips. He stopped, however, noting the surprised and overwhelmed looks, or in Shino's case the way his eyebrows arched minus they had. Blinking, he wondered what exactly had shocked those two into such a state. Turning, he blinked. Only two has a wave of amazement wash over him. The room was large, filled with desks and, most importantly, countless ninja. Most of whom were glaring at them with looks that could kill. Sadly for them, once the amazement had faded, Nalto felt very little else. Their killer glares were nothing compared to Anko's torture. Turning to say something along this line, to Shino and INO, he blinked, finding the girl still frozen and the boy standing almost ramrod straight. It's just a room full of genin. Nalto, this isn't the academy. These are serious ninja, INO snapped, glaring at him. Good. Cause I'm serious too. Nalto said in response, crossing his arms. INO is right, Nalto. We cannot take these ninja lightly, Shino said with a slight shift in posture. Especially if you truly wish to become Hokage. Nalto glared at the boy, then at INO. Fine, they wanted serious. They wanted him to take these idiots seriously. Turning, he glared at the room. My name is Azumaki Nalto. Then, thrusting a finger at the massive ninja, he struck a heroic pose. I won't lose to any of you bastards. You got that? Shaking his head and snorting in frustration, he turned away from the scene. He had more important things to deal with at the moment. For example, why he felt like he was being watched, no sized up minus something he only noticed because Anko had done it before when they first started training. Feeling uneasy, Nalto felt his fingers twitch towards his weapon's holster when suddenly the feeling was gone. Looking around rapidly, he frowned and then turned to his team, only to discover Kiba talking enthusiastically with a stoic Sasuke, while INO and Sakura argued over some stupid hair clip. What is it with them? Nalto asked himself, almost jumping when Shino answered him. I am in the dark as well, the bud user said before his tone lowered slightly. You did feel someone watching us, correct? Oh yeah. But how do you minus? My family can detect denbutsu, Shino explained in a low tone. There is a strong denbutsu in this room and I do not think it wise to alert the others. Oh, why not? Nalto said, turning to look at his teammate curiously. Because it could be part of the exam. Oh, Nalto nodded, frowning slightly as he realized that was a good point. Still didn't feel right not to tell the others. Or at least INO. She was his teammate after all. Turning to mention this to Shino, he was brought up short by the sound of a loud commanding voice. Quiet down, you pathetic bastards. Turning, Nalto watched as several people appeared in a puff of smoke, though his attention focused immediately on the largest one in the middle. The man was dressed in a long black coat, some kind of black head wrapping, and sported several scars on his face. Most importantly to Nalto, however, was the fact this man reminded him strongly of both Anko and Kakashi, someone to watch. He was proven correct a minute later when the man smiled in a way Nalto had come to associate with Anko before she started some sadistic torture, and started talking. I'm Morino Ibikai, the examiner for the Chunin exam's first test. You will obey my rules. You will not kill each other without my permission. If you don't follow my rules, I will fail you immediately, and if you do kill each other without my permission, I will kill and slash or torture you as I see fit. A few of the nearby ninja chuckled, others didn't. Nalto, after the vault of memory at Ibikai's name, quickly noted which ones were among the few who knew a promise when they heard one. Before he could finish that, however, he felt someone studying him once more and turned, almost startled to find Sasuke staring at him intently. A little too intently for Nalto to feel comfortable. Snorting, Nalto turned away from the Uchiha and instead focused on the man who was studying, all of them like they were dissected frogs. Now, let's start the exam, Ibikai said. You are to take a seat at random, making sure to separate yourself from your team. If you don't, we will move you. Do not try to fool us with Henji's denbutsu, or anything else you might has in mind. We will notice. Nalto blinked, then toyed with the idea of trying the variation of his sexy no jutsu that Anko had forced him into practicing to replace the henge. Ultimately, though, he didn't want to reveal something like that move and has it fail utterly. Jerking himself out of that line of thought, he hurriedly scrambled for one of the remaining seats, only to find himself sitting next to Sasuke. The dark-haired boy glanced up and, remaining quiet, looked away. Great, Nalto mumbled to himself, wondering darkly what would happen next. Oh, maybe those pictures Anko had taken yesterday could be passed around. Or a written test that would be just perfect. Here, Sasuke suddenly said. Turning, Nalto saw the paper in the boy's hand, and then looked around, two similar sheets being handed down the other rows. A written test. Nalto shouted, jumping to his feet to stare at Ibikai. You're voking. Sit down, the large man said, trying and failing to intimidate the boy into sitting. Who's your censor? A psychotic bitch, Nalto retorted darkly, crossing his arms. Anko. That explains it. Ibikai said in understanding. Then, would you sit down and relax? This isn't a written test, I assure you. Oh, Nalto managed, flopping back into his seat to stare sulkily at the man, a little amazed and worried that the man had known immediately whom he had been talking about. As I said, this is not a written test, Ibikai explained while they wrote. This test is exactly 3 hours long, and each team will be taking this exam in total isolation from each other. Those sheets of paper are for you to write one personal secret that you do not want an enemy obtaining. Ho. That's the exam. One boy said in surprise. Don't interrupt, Ibikai said, shooting a glare in that direction before continuing. Make sure that you do not allow others to see this secret. But why do we have to write a secret? Yet another random ninja demanded. First, because I said so, and second, to simulate the danger of failing to maintain a village secret from an enemy. Each of you will be led individually to the room designated to your team. One of you will be replaced randomly with a spy who, by using a specialized jutsu, will be nearly undetectable. If you allow the spy to get the information through accident or incompetence, you and your entire team fail. What? Ibikai grinned coldly. As extra incentive, not only does failure keep you from participating in any future exams, it will also result in each of your secrets being told to everyone who passes this test. You can't do that. A stone nin shouted, jumping to his feet. My rules, Ibikai grumbled. If you want to test me, say something else. I'll fail you now. Nalto looked around, unsurprised to see everyone present save a few frozen in fear of failure. Shifting in his seat, the blonde turned back to his, so far blank sheet, wondering what secret he had that he could write. In all honesty, secrets and Nalto did not mix. After a few more minutes of serious thought, during which he considered making one up, he covered the paper with his free hand and began scribbling. Finished, he carefully folded and refolded the paper in the way that Anko had taught him, then looked around innocently. Now as your name is called, you will get up, walk out the door, and head to the room number given, Ibikai said, leveling his gaze on them as the last ninja finished. This is the beginning of the test, and from now on, be careful who you trust. That said, the large man motioned the two men, each holding a clipboard, to step forward and begin calling names. Hino Yasuko Room 1. Tsubaki Toshiro Room 2. Komiya Avi Room 3. Nakamura Takashi Room 4. Oshima Hiroshi Room 5. Azumaki Nalto Room 6. Hyayuga Nevi Room 7. Uchiha Sasuke, Room 8. Utaga Bukai Noga, Room 9. Nalto, halfway out of the room, already turned his gaze, immediately locking onto a smirking Noga. Hackles rising, the blonde seriously considered darting back there and beating that boy black and blue, but instead forced himself to keep walking. He hadn't forgotten that boy, or what Noga had said about being the Hokage, and Nalto silently swore to kick the boy's ass. "HN, that's your room, dope," Sasuke suddenly muttered. Caught up in his anger at Noga, the blonde merely grunted a response and then blindly strode into his room. Then, realizing what Sasuke had called him, Nalto turned to shout a retort at the prodigy, when his world suddenly went black, and he hit the ground with a dull thump. Meanwhile, Inoichi was humming a happy tune, pleased with the world. His daughter was off attempting to take part in the tune-in exams, which both thrilled and terrified him. He was definitely a proud father. After all, not many rookie genin could boast about taking the exam after only 6 months. Even if she didn't make it, it was still something to brag about, and that was exactly what he had planned. Choza and Shikaku would both be at the local bar, along with most of the other free jonin, placing bets and drinking, waiting to hear who cleared the first stage. Inoichi was almost rubbing his hands together in anticipation. Both had sons who were genin, but neither boy had been allowed to enter the exam. After all the ribbing they had given him for having a girl, he could finally get back at them. Karma was good. Turning his mind away from his two friends, he instead mused on the mysterious Nalto. The name was familiar, but he couldn't place it exactly, which didn't mean much in a village the size of Konoha. Still, the name wasn't common, so he should be able to place a name to the face, especially if the kid came from a family of ninja. Shrugging it off, he sighed, his protective side swearing that he would meet the boy first chance he got. His fatherly duty demanded that he confront this unknown teenage boy and lay the law down, his wife demanded that he leave it alone. In the end he could wait until after the Chunin exams, but he and this Nalto would definitely be having a discussion soon. Hearing the ruckus up ahead, thoughts about his daughter and Nalto were driven out of his mind. He could hear the heavy betting going on. Rubbing his hands gleefully, he sped up, slipping into the bar to join in the betting pool. There was a decent-sized group, some of whom were still in unboot gear, and military police uniforms crowded before a large bar where an even larger board was hanging and a man was taking bets. "Anyone else?" the barman shouted. "Last call, the exam starts in 10 minutes. I put 50 ryo on Sasuke-kun's team passing." 50 on Team 7, the barman echoed back, turning to right. 5 to 20 odds, anyone else? 75 ryo on Nalto-san's team passing. One of the unbu shouted, echoed by his buddies. 75 on Team 9. The barman said. 5 to 20 odds, anyone else? Inoichi blinked, impressed that his daughter's team actually had the same odds of passing as a genius like Uchiha Sasuke. It was also slightly unnerving to know that his daughter was apparently that dangerous, which was not a good thing for any parent. Still, he had better show his support. 100 ryo on my daughter Ino's team. 100 on Team 9. The barman echoed back. Satisfied, Inoichi turned and, nodding at a few acquaintances, sidled up to the bar, where drinks were being served, finding both friends laughing about something. Ordering with smug satisfaction, he took sake and cup and moved down to join his friends who turned at his approach. "Hey, Inoichi," Chusa said happily, fishing in his nearby bowl of bar snacks. "We were just talking about your daughter's team." "Oh," Inoichi said, pouring his sake carefully before glancing at the other two. "I am rather proud of her. Only 6 months as a genin and she's already good enough for the exams. Actually, I don't think that's the reason why she's involved," Shikaki said, gulping his own sake. "Ho-sensei isn't known for patience." "Harate-san." Inoichi blinked, staring at the two men. "I know he's sick, but I met him. He's a perfectly good sensei." "Yeah," Chusa said, his lips twitching as he fought back his laughter. "Mitarashi Anko isn't though. That's your daughter's new sensei." "What?" Inoichi shouted, his fingers slackening enough to allow his cup to fall with a loud crack. Staring at the two in surprise, he turned quickly, eyes straining to see the sensei name beside the team numbers. "Kami. That's not. No, no. Oh. Heaven help Ino. You think that's bad?" Shikaki said with some amusement. "Look at her teammates." "Ho." Inoichi said, glancing at his friend, before looking back at the board. "Abe Shino and Azumaki Nalto." He frowned, thinking that that name was now very familiar for some reason. He turned to say something to his old teammates when he snapped back around, eyes widening in surprise and horror. "Wait a godamned minute. Azumaki Nalto. That. The kid in the hospital. Fuck. Fuck." He continued in this vein for several minutes, eventually progressing to frothing at the mouth, followed shortly by fainting. "I was sure he'd go straight to heart attack," Shikaki said, passing Chusa 30 ryo. "The big sissy." Coming back to the waking world, Ino grimaced, noting the cool floor against her skin. Shivering, she eased herself onto her back, wincing as she stared up at the pure white ceiling. Sitting up, she frowned, noting that the entire room was the same pure white. Reaching up to hold the side of her head, she winced, wondering what exactly was going on. Nobody had mentioned being knocked out. "Oi, you're awake." Jerking, which was a bad idea, Ino looked up from the spot in front of her to her teammate's face. For a moment, he didn't look real, like some damn cartoon. This, however, was because of his bright clothes standing out against the white walls. She was pretty sure, even she would look like a cartoon in this situation. "Ino." "I'm fine," Ino said, holding a hand up while motioning for him to lower his volume. "Kami, what happened?" "Last thing I remember was seeing you on the ground when I came in. I saw much the same thing," Shino suddenly injected, drawing Ino's attention. I think it is part of the exam, a way to ensure that one of us could be replaced properly. Ino nodded and then leaned back against a nearby wall, a bit awed that even Shino looked like a cartoon in this room, while mentally trying to work out what to do now. Shino's explanation had reminded her that at least one of these boys was not who he seemed. Nalto, however, seemed more intent on pacing and ranting under his breath, as if completely unaware that he should be trying to find the spy. Now Yamanaka Ino was by no stretch of the imagination a genius, even if she was talented with a sword, but she already knew how to figure this situation out. After all, her family had already created the perfect jutsu to this situation, the Shintenshine no Jutsu. It was the only logical choice in discovering the spy, even if there were risks to using it. First, if it failed, which was likely, she could potentially alert her target. Second, if she was wrong and the spy noticed her trick, he would be on alert or attack her real body. Still, it was the only option they had, and Ino had to decide on which boy to use it. That was not going to be an easy task either, neither one seemed out of character. It was a tough choice, one she wasn't sure she could make in all honesty. Still, it had to be done, and that meant, since she lacked real clues, she would have to use it on Nalto. Mainly because her father had always told her to never try the Shintenshine on an Abaime. Which wasn't surprising, since even Ino now knew that Abaime and their bugs were connected by some sort of constant psychic bond. It would safer to try it on Nalto, and if she was wrong about the blonde, she would have the strongest member of the team under her control to protect her real body. That settled, she gathered her resolve and nerves, then surreptitiously moved her hands into position and clenched her eyes, silently mouthing the words to the jutsu. Then, just like that, she was free of her body, weightless, free, and moving toward the unsuspecting Nalto. It felt like hours, though it was only minutes, but finally she was there, and, without preamble, she attempted to slip into his mind. A second later, her head snapped back from being reflected faster than her mind had been able to blink. That was when she felt a touch of panic. Ino had been in several minds. In all of that time, all of those minds, she had learned of three things they had in common. The mind was a type of maze, that it could not be read like a book, and that even if she couldn't maintain control, she could enter for a moment. Azumaki Naoto's mind, however, in that split second of contact, was like nothing she had ever experienced. It was hidden, locked away completely. The only way to describe it, in terms she could understand, was a black wall. A sheer wall of darkness. Blinking away the stars of pain that danced in front her eyes, she checked on the blonde and found him agitatedly shifting around. Glancing at Shino, she was surprised to see him looking at her in what was his version of a questioning look. Ino frowned and turned her attention back to Nalto and, forming the seals, tried once more. It seemed to take even longer this time, and when she finally did reach the blonde, she braced herself. It happened even faster, and this time her head snapped back hard enough to thump against the wall behind her. Reaching up to hold her head, she stared at the now concerned-looking boy with awe, and possibly terror. How could anyone have built such a wall in their mind? Did he build it on purpose? Why? How? Ino. Hey Ino, you okay? Nalto asked in concern, moving over to crouch next to her. Ho. Yeah, Ino managed, forcing her hands to stop shaking. It's just starting to get to me, I guess. Oi, it's not that big a deal. Nalto said, touching her shoulder in a reassuring manner. Yeah, Ino agreed reflexively, while mentally she was rambling about what she had encountered. As far as she knew, nobody had ever been able to completely block access to their minds from a Yamanaka. Tuning his reassuring, as well as loud words out, Ino reached up to rub her temples. Not that big a deal, Ino muttered, looking at the blonde who was now rambling on about ramen. Still, at least Ino felt fairly certain that Nalto was not the spy. After all, nobody could act that enraptured with noodles. Shino watched Nalto closely, wondering at the boy, and his apparently ever-shifting moods. Shaking it off, he turned his mind to the matter at hand, finding the spy. Or more correctly, he mused how to alert Nalto to the fact that Ino had to be the spy. After all, Shino had yet to encounter another person that could provoke his bugs into biting. Plus, he had never known Ino to be that quiet, and still not even yesterday. She had to be a spy. And a bad one at that. Yet, he wondered about that. The problem the situation presented was interesting. To discover the spy would be easy enough. If you knew your team halfway decently, it was alerting your true teammate that was difficult. Plus, as Nalto was proving, these rooms were designed to increase discomfort. Even Shino could feel his unease increasing with each passing moment locked within this room. If it wasn't for his family constantly reassuring him that the walls were not moving closer together, he might have actually been panicking. It was as if this entire room was designed to create panic and increase an already stressful situation. Okay, I can't take this much longer. INO suddenly said, getting to her feet and glaring at Shino. Unless we discover for sure who the spy is, we will have to, Shino explained, standing as well, unwilling to allow a spy to hold any leverage over him. Well, that's easy. INO snapped, glaring at him. All we have to do is look at the clues. 1. Who in this room is acting out of character? 2. Who in this room would be easiest to replace? 3. All of those could describe any of us, Shino explained calmly. The only person in this room that I know for sure is who they appear to be is Nalto. Which leaves you as the spy. No way, INO said angrily, rounding on him. You're the spy. You haven't talked to a bug yet, and the real Shino is always talking to a bug. Unless I am doing so without being obvious, Shino responded coolly. Perhaps in an attempt to lure a spy into the open. I'm not the spy. INO shouted, advancing toward him slightly. And I say I am not the spy. Shino said with a casual shrug. If we both agree that Nalto is not the spy, then we must agree that one of us is. We will have to prove who we are. Wait, how do you guys know? Nalto started to ask before Shino cut him off. My family reacts to you in a way that can't be faked, Shino explained calmly. Plus, you're the only person that could sound in love with ramen, INO added dryly, glaring at Shino. And you have this weird habit of nodding to yourself when you think, and you tend to keep your eyes closed. Those are things that only a Yamanaka or an Uchiha could notice, and neither would be in this room right now. Shino paused, then arched an eyebrow. Now that sounded like INO, which made him wonder if they hadn't been going about this all wrong. Perhaps we are overthinking this problem. What does that mean? INO said, fixing him with her stare. It could be that there is no spy among us. You would say that. You are the most likely to be the spy after all, INO retorted fiercely. I think what we should concentrate on is proving if there is a spy among us or not who that spy is. And, how do we manage that? That I am not sure of, Shino said after pausing for a moment. The theory was good, but difficult to prove. I know how to solve this problem, Nalto said with a grin, looking between the two. Oh. I gotta hear this, INO said with a huff, crossing her arms. I too am curious about your solution, Shino said calmly, wondering in silence about how exactly such an atypical person would go about solving such a complicated problem. Especially when such a person had a tendency just to hit first and worry about details later. Oi, it's easy. Nalto said, nodding as he rubbed his chin. We just gotta prove if there's a spy here or not, right? Yes, Shino said, lowering his head slightly. Yeah, INO agreed darkly, shooting Shino a distrusting glare. Then it's easy, the orange-clad boy said, his tone growing intent. The only way to prove it is for one of us to reveal a secret to the others. If there is a spy, then we fail, if not, we pass. That is a tad too simplistic, Nalto, Shino explained slowly. None of us can be sure if we are who we say we are. Gambling our advancement is not wise. If this were a village secret, would you be so willing to share it? Oi, trust me, Nalto said confidently. But INO started to object before Nalto cut her off, his tone determined. My secret is I like pork ramen more than miso ramen. Shino blinked, unable to believe that the boy had just taken such a large leap of faith. From the look of surprise on INO's face, she couldn't believe it either. The moment lasted another minute, and then the door opened and a ninja wearing a green flak vest beckoned them to follow. Shino silently led the way, aware that Nalto seemed a bit too smug about something. It wasn't as if he didn't have faith in his family, but these were highly trained ninja that were testing them. The possibility that they could trick them was very real. He wasn't the only one to think that either, if INO's whispered beratings of Nalto were anything to judge by. What has you done? Are you a complete idiot? Now we'll never be tuning. Oi, give it a rest. INO, I am sure that Nalto has done only what he believed he had to, Shino said, not looking behind him. He would just have to trust his family and his teammate. Whatever, the girl muttered. He's still an idiot. That merely set Nalto off, and Shino couldn't help but sigh, noting that even the escort sighed with him. Apparently, he wasn't the only one who found the two blondes arguing annoying, which wasn't surprising. Both had rather explosive tempers and naturally loud voices. It was something Shino had adjusted to slightly over the last 3 days, but it was still a bit much. Thankfully, they were forced to stop as their Chunin escort opened the door and ushered them all back into the main room. Gathered in groups were a handful of teams, the bulk of which appeared to be Kusa, or war with a scattering of Konoha ninja. "You three, don't just stand there gawking," Ibukai suddenly snapped, eyes narrowed. "Sit your asses down and be quiet." "Oi, why don't you just kiss my MMMth?" Nalto started to say before INO clamped a hand over his mouth and apologized while dragging the blonde behind Shino. Shino, on the other hand, was curious about the timing of Ibukai's response and even more so about the whole situation. If they had failed, then they should have been told and sent on their way, but this didn't exactly feel as if they had failed. As if to prove this point, the grizzled man up front crossed his arms and started talking. This exam started with exactly 144 participants. That was a total of 48 teams, each with 3 members. Each team has spent at the minimum 336 hours together, risking their lives to each other. Ibukai paused, glancing from team to team before continuing. Of these 48 teams, we now has only 30 that are qualified to continue with this exam. "Wait, we passed?" Sakura asked in amazement, and there was a general muttering of agreement. "Of course you passed," Ibukai said with a small chuckle, and Shino was reminded of both Anko and Nalto with their ever-shifting personalities. "Each of you proved your ability and whether knowingly or unknowingly solved the problem of the spy." "Ho." A girl sporting 4 ponytails managed, blinking rapidly. "This test was designed to test your ability to work under pressure, the stress and paranoia of not knowing who to trust. Your ability to gather information from people who could misinterpret that as hostile and attack," Ibukai explained with a sweeping gesture. "But we didn't have a spy," Kiba said in exasperation. Shino, who had been lost in thought, quickly snapped back to attention, noting the agreeing sounds filling the room. So there hadn't been a single spy on any of these teams. Well, that was to be expected, but only on the surface. Statistically, there should have been a handful of teams that had a spy. "Of course not," Ibukai said in amusement. "None of the teams ever had a spy. It was all a trick because as Chunins, you'll be given with important information. You need to has an ability to check on those you has doubts about without letting on. Those teams that failed, the ones that turned on each other, they weren't worthy of the Chunin rank." Reaching up, Ibukai removed his bandana, revealing the most horrific vision possible. Scars, burns, scabbed over holes. As Chunin, you will be faced with that and 100 other serious decisions. You'll have to know your team, as well as you know yourself, if not better. Because in war, secrets and information are worth not just your team's life, but the lives of thousands of your fellow shinobi. Shino frowned, then nodded in understanding, as did several others. So, he had been right, there had never been a spy. It also hammered home his feelings and the knowledge that he would have to make it a point to trust his family and teammates even more. A single moment of doubt could prove disastrous, even Nalto seemed to share that understanding. "So, we really passed?" INO said hesitantly in amazement. "Yes. Yes." INO shouted, glomping Nalto before jumping to her feet and pointing at Sakura. "Take that, you big 4-headed bimbo. Sasuke-kun will be mine." "What was that, piggy?" Sakura shouted back, jumping to her feet as well. Suddenly, the second test is looking a tad more interesting, a new voice said, interrupting the arguments, and everyone turned to stare at the masked one-eyed silver-haired man now standing next to Ibukai reading a red book. "Oi, it's the masked pervert," Nalto suddenly said, thrusting his finger at the man. "Masked pervert," INO echoed, blinking while Shino arched an eyebrow. He was finally beginning to notice a trend in how Nalto referred to some people. "Yeah, he reads really naughty books in public," Nalto exclaimed, despite the fact that almost everybody was now staring at him, except the man who was busy reading and giggling minus "It's kinda weird, though he's really strong and everything." "Ho. Oh Nalto, you passed," Kakashi said, cutting him off. "I suppose Anko won't have to castrate you after all, ho." That's it to this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe to the next video, as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlist. Hope you would like them too.